This is gonna be a good one. Doctor Who is a show I absolutely adore. Big surprise. If you're unfamiliar, Doctor Who is a BBC-produced sci-fi show about a time-traveling alien called the Doctor. The Doctor travels around the universe in a time machine called the TARDIS that's bigger on the inside. The Doctor goes around stopping bad guys, righting wrongs, and kissing barely legal humans. However, when the Doctor dies, they can just click the respawn button and come back to life with a completely different face. Usually. Every Doctor is different. Every Doctor has their own unique charm, and every Doctor is someone's favourite. Except for the 4th Morbius Doctor. God, they really let him down with the writing in that era. But this video is focused on a specific Doctor. The 12th Doctor, played by Peter Capaldi. My personal all-time favourite, and one who, for the longest time, was collectively dismissed by the fanbase as a great Doctor let down by bad writing. However, in recent years, the perception of this era has drastically changed, as people began to realise just how based and heaven-sent pilled this era actually is. The Peter Capaldi era of Doctor Who is, in my opinion, the most emotionally mature and nuanced period of the entire show. It's a lot more character-focused than previous eras, which just adds so many layers to the overall era that could go over the head of a less emotionally invested viewer. This is already sounding like the Rick and Morty copypasta. What I'm saying is, the Capaldi era works much better as a finished product, and that's what I'm going to discuss today. Why the Peter Capaldi era of Doctor Who was an overlooked masterpiece, and doesn't deserve the bad writing assertion it still so commonly gets conventionalized with. Quick disclaimer, as you can probably tell, this video is a bit long, and will almost definitely get claimed to oblivion by the BBC. So, as much as I hate asking for this kind of stuff, subscribing really helps out. Only do it if you're enjoying the video, but if you want to help out, subscribing and leaving a comment will really help get the video out there. And with that out of the way, let's begin. Let's go back. Back to the past. 2013. Doctor Who is in the middle of its 50th anniversary, with the big anniversary special, The Day of the Doctor, only a few months away. At this point, it had already been confirmed that Matt Smith, the 11th and incumbent Doctor, was leaving the role at the end of the year, after a very successful tenure, denying all naysayers and reaching a level of mainstream appeal comparable to the previously insurmountable David Tennant. There had already been mass speculation as to who the next Doctor could be, and whether they could continue the hype created by Tennant and Smith over the last 7 years. The new Doctor was to be announced in a special BBC One broadcast on the 4th of August 2013, titled Doctor Who Live, The Next Doctor. This already hinted at the next Doctor being a noteworthy one. Back in 2009, Matt Smith's announcement as the 11th Doctor was confined to a sudden reveal in an episode of Doctor Who Confidential, and the majority of the episode doesn't even focus on him. But Matt Smith wasn't a household name at this point, so it kinda makes sense why they wouldn't hype him up as this big reveal. But with this special broadcast, it seemed like the next Doctor was gonna be an already established big name, or maybe some big surprise reveal that no one could have expected. What if David Tennant is coming back? Oh my god! Regardless, anticipation was rife as the broadcast began, with the reveal being built up throughout the special. And then...
Ladies and gentlemen, it's the end, but the moment has been prepared for. I know you're beside yourself with excitement. The tension is unbearable. It's... Peter Capaldi!
It was Peter Capaldi, a Scottish actor who, was already an established name in UK culture. He was perhaps best known for his role as Malcolm Tucker in The Thick of It, a satirical comedy about the British government and the absolute chaos that goes on behind the scenes. I say behind the scenes, he'd also dipped his toe into the Doctor Who universe a couple times. He first played certified marble man Lobus Caecilius in the Series 4 episode The Fires of Pompeii, and played civil servant John Frobisher in Series 3 of the Doctor Who spin-off show Torchwood. Capaldi is a lifelong fan of Doctor Who, writing so much fan mail to 3rd Doctor John Pertwee that he was invited on set during the filming of Pertwee's final episode, Planet of the Spiders. And not long after, Elizabeth Sladen invited him back, and he met 4th Doctor Tom Baker. He also wrote so many letters to the BBC about Doctor Who to the point where the production secretary for the show, Sarah Newman, wanted him dead. The BBC just isn't what it was. Peter gradually lost interest in the show over the years, as he pursued his career in acting, as well as music, being the lead singer and guitarist in his band The Dream Boys, until finally, in 2013, he achieved his childhood dream. In the build-up to Capaldi's debut, there were a lot of major events happening in the show. First, the Doctor discovered his own grave on the planet Trenzalore, where he dies in battle. It's there that the Great Intelligence, a recurring villain who appeared a couple times in the 2nd Doctor era, enters the Doctor's time stream and undoes all of his victories, only for the Doctor's companion, Clara, to also enter the time stream and undo all of the Intelligence's undoing. Then, there was the 50th anniversary, where all the Doctors team up, and with the help of Capaldi's eyebrows, save Gallifrey from the Time War. Then, in Matt Smith's final episode as the 11th Doctor, the Time Lords are trying to return to the universe through a crack caused by the Doctor's TARDIS blowing up. But half of the universe is waiting just above the planet, and if the Time Lords returned, the Time War would begin again, and that future we saw of the battlefield would be set in stone. The Doctor ends up living on Trenzalore for centuries, growing old but unable to regenerate, as we find out he has no more regenerations. Towards the end, the Doctor is dying of old age, and the Daleks are just about to kill him and destroy the planet, but then Clara convinces the Time Lords to help him. The Doctor is granted a new regeneration cycle, the future of war is prevented, and the Doctor can leave. He gives a big speech about accepting change before sneezing a little too hard and sprouting some sick eyebrows. And thus, the 12th Doctor is born, and a new era begins. It's clear now that the Capaldi era has been and gone that Moffat wanted this era of the show to be different, to challenge the audience and the characters. And the 12th Doctor's first episode, Deep Breath, serves perfectly as a statement of intent for this new era. A lot of people didn't like this episode and still don't, even now, but I think it does what it set out to do incredibly well. The concept of introducing a new Doctor and planting the seeds for a whole new era is no enviable task, and this was Moffat's second time doing this. Deep Breath is definitely quite different from the 11th Hour, but they both serve as great introductions to their respective eras. Deep Breath begins with a dinosaur walking along the Thames. Yeah, this is still Doctor Who. Then, we see the Paternoster gang coming to investigate. These guys don't really have a massive impact on the main plot, they're mainly just here to ease the transition somewhat. But Vastra does a great job of putting the Doctor's regeneration into perspective for Clara and the audience. I'll get to that in a bit.
The Times! Shall I set it up?
Yeah, why not?
Ah!
The dinosaur throws up the TARDIS, and the Doctor comes out, clearly quite shaken up by the whole regeneration thing. Clara also emerges from the TARDIS, and apparently they had some sick hairdressers in the Cretaceous period, because Clara's hairstyle is completely different to how it was in Time of the Doctor. Introducing the new Doctor is obviously an essential aspect of a Doctor's first episode, and I think Peter Capaldi immediately puts his stamp on the character. Clearly frazzled and a bit confused from his regeneration, but still undeniably the Doctor. I think the dinosaur in the first part of the episode could be seen as an allegory for the old fans of the show who are struggling to let go of the previous era, suddenly flung into unfamiliar territory by this new Doctor they don't know or understand. Up until it gets burned alive by the episode's villain. Yeah, hopefully that didn't happen to anyone. The villain of the episode is the Half-Face Man, a droid that is constantly killing people and harvesting their organs and skin in order for it and its robot Mandem to repair their ship and head to the Promised Land. When it comes to the main threat in post-regeneration stories, the last couple had been a bit more extravagant in comparison. First, there were the Sycorax, who wanted to enslave half of the human race, and then there was the Atraxi, who planned on burning the entire planet just to kill one fugitive. The plan of the droids of the SS Marie Antoinette isn't quite on that scale. They just want the necessary parts so they can leave the planet. But it works really well, because the plan doesn't need to be extravagant. Like I said, this episode is a statement of intent for this new era, And so the main focus is on the concept of the droids themselves, and the parallels they draw to the Doctor. The droids have replaced parts of themselves so much that it's debatable whether they're still the same droids they were millions of years ago. It's a classic example of the Ship of Theseus question, which the episode references, albeit with the broom example.
You take a broom, you replace the hand, and then later you replace the brush. Is it still the same broom? Answer, no, of course it isn't.
But this could also be applied to the Doctor. He's thousands of years old now, and has changed his face and personality so much. Is he even the same person anymore? Clara definitely doesn't think so. Another major aspect of this episode is Clara, who's struggling to accept this new Doctor. A lot of people say it makes no sense that Clara is unable to accept the Doctor, since she went into his time stream and met all of them, but yeah, no, it does make sense. Clara is the stand-in for the audience here. We all know the Doctor regenerates. We all know the Doctor has regenerated multiple times before. Despite this, it's not uncommon for people to feel a level of uncertainty or immediate disdain when letting go of their Doctor. And that's what Clara represents. If it doesn't make sense for her to struggle to accept this new Doctor because she knows about regeneration and has seen previous Doctors, why do so many people IRL struggle to accept a new Doctor? She might have seen all the different Doctors, but that's not the same as letting go of her Doctor and seeing this unfamiliar guy swagger about in his place. People say Clara is the least suited companion to be disgruntled about the Doctor changing, but in terms of being an audience surrogate, I think she fits the role better than any other companion. Vastra puts things into perspective for Clara and the audience. Even though the Doctor looked young, he's thousands of years old. After the Time War, and throughout the entirety of New Who thus far, he wore a younger face, possibly to compensate for everything he did during the Time War. It was his way of subconsciously regressing to who he was before the Time War, and to be accepted by his friends, who would be less likely to accept an old, grizzled war veteran. But with Gallifrey surviving, he doesn't need to hide behind that regret or guilt anymore. For the first time in the modern series, the Doctor feels like he can be himself, but he's not entirely sure who that is anymore. He spent so much time being the man who regrets, the man who forgets, constantly trying to atone for the events of the Time War, and he's not sure who he is without that extra motivation. And I think that's where the whole good man arc of Series 8 comes from. This arc for the Doctor begins with his confrontation with the half-faced man. He and Clara get separated by a closing door, and the Doctor escapes, rather than rescuing Clara, because taking the time to rescue her would probably get them both captured. So, he abandons Clara, having faith that she will manage to survive and gain information on the droids without him being there too. He essentially sees Clara as a chess piece here, potentially sacrificing her life in the hope that things turn out the way he intends. And sure enough, Clara manages to take advantage of the situation, using facts and logic, and calling the half-faced man's bluff in order to get information. And just like the Doctor has faith in Clara to survive, Clara has faith that the Doctor will be there to save her. Even though she still doesn't know or particularly trust this new Doctor, she has to take a deep breath and have faith in him. And sure enough, he doesn't let her down.
Hello, hello.
I think this scene is also the proper beginning of Clara's arc of trying to be independent and prove she can be like the Doctor. It technically began in Nightmare in Silver, as she takes charge of the punishment platoon and strategizes on how to defeat the Cybermen. Then, in Name of the Doctor, she takes the initiative to jump into the Doctor's time stream, almost definitely killing herself, but doing it anyway to save the Doctor. Day of the Doctor and Time of the Doctor don't have any major confidence moments like those two examples, but Clara manages to think quickly and steals the Vortex Manipulator before being killed by the Zygons, and convinces the Time Lords to help the Doctor. You can see how she'd been growing in confidence towards the end of Series 7, and here, she gets thrown into the deep end, and has to think like the Doctor, because she's not even fully sure if the Doctor's there. And even if he is, she's unsure if it's even the same Doctor she knows. So, she has to take his place. And this is where her journey of trying to be like the Doctor properly begins. I love the final confrontation between the Doctor and the half-faced man. How the Doctor says that one of them is lying about their basic programming when it comes to murder, only for the next shot to be the droid impaled on the spire of Big Ben. The episode tries to make it ambiguous what actually happened, which I'm assuming was to keep it a family show, but yeah, it's pretty obvious what actually happened. But then, after everything that's happened, Clara still decides she doesn't want to travel with the Doctor anymore. After opening up to Clara, trusting her to accept the new him, she still can't, and it breaks his heart.
You can't see me, can you? You look at me and you can't see me.
But then, Clara gets a phone call from the 11th Doctor, just before he changed, telling Clara that this new Doctor is scared, and he needs her to put her faith in him. That no matter what, he's still the Doctor. And I just love this. There would have definitely been people still unwilling to let Smith go at this point, so hearing this from the man himself is more than enough proof that this is still the Doctor. That his age and looks don't define him. And that he needs us. Not just the Doctor, but Capaldi himself. He needs our love and support, because God knows how scary this would have been for him. A brilliant ending to a brilliant episode. Except...
No! I'm Missy.
We're introduced to Missy. God, I have so much to say about Missy, but not yet. Michelle Gomez instantly leaves an impact with her performance, killing it with only a couple minutes of screen time, as we're introduced to the other main series arc, Heaven. There's not much else to say about this arc at the moment, but it serves as an intriguing hook for the series. Deep Breath as a whole is a brilliant start to the 12th Doctor era. It establishes what this new era is going to be about, while introducing a new Doctor to an uneasy audience. It does everything it realistically can to get the audience to give this new Doctor a chance, all while telling a solid story on its own, and setting up some interesting plot threads. Deep Breath does not get the credit it deserves. I'd argue it's at least on par with the 11th Hour. They may be very different episodes, but structurally and quality-wise, I'd say they're pretty comparable. Overall, a very interesting opening to this new era. Up next is Into the Dalek. Now, I'll be completely honest, one of my least favourite aspects of the Moffat era is how the Daleks were handled. I know it was always going to be hard to top the brilliant handling of the Daleks in the RTD era, but come on, is Asylum of the Daleks really the best Moffat could do? Why do the Daleks have an asylum? It makes no sense. Okay, I'll stop. But to be honest, Into the Dalek might be my favourite use of the Daleks in the Moffat era. This was the first non-special episode since Nightmare in Silver, and it had to continue establishing this new Doctor, while expanding on the themes presented in Deep Breath, all while balancing a good Dalek story on top. A new theme of Series 8 that begins in this episode is the 12th Doctor's utter disdain for soldiers. It's a theme that persists during the rest of the series, and is definitely the Doctor projecting his self-hatred due to his history as a soldier. But it also ties in with his main arc of the series, which properly begins in this episode, as he asks Clara,
My good man.
I already mentioned this a few minutes ago, but I think this arc comes from the Doctor not being sure who he is anymore, without the guilt of the Time War looming over him. It consumed so much of his life for centuries that he's not sure where to go now. It sort of reminds me of the discussion between the Doctor and the Master in The End of Time.
Don't know what I'd be without that noise.
Wonder what I'd be without you.
They've both had things that have defined their lives, what they stand for, who they want to be. The Time War for the Doctor, and the drumbeat for the Master. And so, it's hard for them to properly tell who they are, without these things. Anyway, the plot itself. A Dalek has been damaged, and is no longer evil. So the Doctor, Clara, and some soldiers get miniaturized, and have to go inside the Dalek to find out what the problem is. Something I really like about this episode is the cinematography. It's really unique and immersive. There are just so many touches that really help immerse you into the episode. Like how it genuinely seems like the characters have been shrunk down. Or the scene of the crew entering the Dalek. The inside of the Dalek is also a really cool set. I really like this design. Into the Dalek is a pretty big indicator of the kind of person the Doctor was going to be throughout Series 8.
This is Clara, not my assistant. She's some other word.
I'm his carer.
Yeah, my carer. She cares, so I don't have to.
This line is played as a joke, but there is genuinely an element of truth to it. Clara is beginning to accept her reality with this new Doctor, and is quickly adapting to his new, more abrasive personality. Then, there's the first time he unapologetically sacrifices someone else to try and ensure everyone else's survival. He claims that the soldier was gonna die anyway, but it's still undeniably a cold move from the Doctor. And not only that, but he jokes about the soldier being dead immediately afterwards. He's incredibly dismissive, and it seems quite out of character for the Doctor. But then, the Doctor is forced to face his attitudes, as he confronts the Dalek. Clara and the remaining soldiers mess around with Rusty's memory core, to try and reawaken the memory that turned him good. The memory of watching a star being born. The Doctor also links his mind with Rusty and transfers his memories. At first, Rusty is amazed by all the beauty in the universe that the Doctor has seen, until he notices the Doctor's hatred towards the Daleks. A Dalek's primary instinct is to hate, and there's no shortage of hatred to be found in the Doctor's mind. We've seen throughout New Who how much disdain the Doctor truly has for the Daleks. Except for Asylum of the Daleks, but that whole episode is stinky anyway. And we've seen with things like the Valyard and the Dream Lord that the Doctor has a major dark side that can be weaponized. And that's what the Dalek does here. The Doctor had hoped he could turn a Dalek good, but all he did was turn it into another kind of evil. His own kind of evil. And the more melancholic music that plays when Rusty starts killing other Daleks sells the tragedy and disappointment of this scene. You'd think a Dalek turning against its own kind would be a triumphant moment, but it's not, because of what caused it. The Doctor's own hatred. The final interaction between the Doctor and Rusty is a brilliant parallel to Dalek. In that episode, the Doctor lets his full, unfiltered hatred for the Daleks loose, saying,
"The Daleks have failed! Why don't you finish the job and make the Daleks extinct? Rid the universe of your filth! Why don't you just die?"
To which the lone Dalek responds,
You would make a good Dalek.
showing how, despite his complete moral opposition to the fascistic Pepper Potts, he can behave just like them at times, and is more alike to the Daleks than he would like to think. Something that was expanded on more in Journey's End. Here, the "you would make a good Dalek" line is expanded on. The term good Dalek is being used as a double meaning here. The Doctor calls Rusty a good Dalek, ergo a Dalek that is not evil, while Rusty interprets the phrase a different way, using good Dalek in the sense that the Doctor is good at being a Dalek. Given the Doctor's callous attitude throughout this episode, it really puts things into question. Is this who the Doctor is now? Is this the path he's going to go down post-Translaw? Is he a good man? We can only wait and see. Another aspect of this episode that I didn't mention until now because it's very separated from the main plot is the introduction of Danny Pink. Danny is a maths teacher at Coal Hill School, where Clara teaches. They both hit it off, and Clara also finds out he used to be a soldier. Wait a minute, the Doctor doesn't like those!
What are you, children?
Yes, sir.
That would have been funny if he didn't get a response. So yeah, we're introduced to Danny with the knowledge that he used to be a soldier, and clearly harbors some guilt, as he has a mini breakdown when asked if he ever killed someone who wasn't a soldier. I think he has angst. The scene of him reflecting on the conversation he just had and thinking of all the things he should have said is very relatable. It's obvious his past as a soldier has a big impact on who he is, but the show doesn't detract from the fact that he's still an ordinary person, and I like that. And that's Into the Dalek. Another very solid episode that expands on the themes presented in Deep Breath, introduces new themes and threads, and tells a solid Dalek story. It does a great job at expanding on themes of morality for the Doctor, and sets up the themes and arcs that'll be expanded on later in the series. We next see Clara and Danny's relationship develop further in episode 4, Listen. And that is the only notable thing that happens in this episode. Yep, so Clara and Danny are finally having their first date, and it is just horrendously awkward. Not in a this relationship is forced and won't work out kind of way, more in a they have some noticeable differences, but are both clearly mature and open-minded enough to work through it. The main problem they've faced in their interactions just far is Clara's prejudice about soldiers, assuming they're all just heartless mass murderers who will shoot anyone. Obviously, this isn't always true, as Danny says himself that he did plenty of good things as a soldier, like building wells. This is a pretty common stereotype of soldiers in real life as well, but I think Clara realizes eventually that her prejudice towards Danny being a soldier makes her sound somewhat like this new Doctor, and perhaps her prejudice is influenced by him to some degree. But Clara still doesn't entirely trust or embrace the 12th Doctor, trying to fill in for the gaps in compassion that he's shown so far. And this conflict between these two aspects of her life gets expanded on more in The Caretaker, which I'll get to in a bit. Meanwhile, the Doctor is talking to his Twitch chat. He's recently become hyperfixated on this theory. What if there was a being that evolved specifically to hide, an expert in remaining unseen? What if the reason we talk to ourselves when we're alone is because we subconsciously know we aren't? I mean, I'm sort of doing it right now. Listen immediately establishes itself as more than just your conventional Doctor Who episode. I love it when an episode goes off the beaten track and does something truly unique. It almost always results in an amazing episode. No, not you. Bad. Away. The Doctor begins with a monologue about his theory. Or at least, we assume it's a monologue. He brings up the idea that everyone supposedly has the exact same dream at some point in their lives, about something being under their bed and grabbing their foot. This is actually based on a nightmare that writer Stephen Moffat had as a child. Personally, the earliest nightmare I remember having was the devil from the Satan pit being in my house. And I grew up to be an incredibly functional member of society. The Doctor tries using Clara, very sad that she handled her first date worse than any Doctor Who fan possibly could, to test his theory. He wants to find the exact night she had that dream, and the only way for her to do that is to finger the TARDIS. And people say this show sucks. So Clara thinks about the dream, but then gets a phone call from who she assumes to be Danny, and due to a simple skill issue, things go wrong, and they end up in some random orphanage. Clara finds some kid called Rupert Pink, and thinks nothing of it. Rupert is scared of what he thinks is under his bed, but Clara comforts him, in a very self-confident kind of way, going under the bed to show there's nothing there. But then...
nothing to be afraid of.
The tables have turned. Now the monster is on top of the bed, and the Doctor spawns in, giving a big speech to Rupert about how being scared is a superpower. Then, they all turn their backs on the thing on the bed, and promise to let it go in peace. I love how even the Doctor is scared of what it could be. His theory might have just been proved right, but that terrifies him. We never find out what was on the bed, whether it really was this being the Doctor theorized about, or whether it was just one of Rupert's friends trying to prank him. And that's one of the best things about this episode. The main concept remains ambiguous. We never know for sure if there was ever anything under the bed. Every mystery in this episode has a reasonable explanation. The Doctor might have just knocked over that chalk without realizing. Clara says the writing on the chalkboard looks like his handwriting. The figure under the blanket could have just been another kid playing a joke. It's shown that the Doctor himself likes playing into the theory to scare others, like how he mysteriously vanishes and takes that guy's coffee with him. Everything can be somewhat reasonably explained, except for possibly the scene at the end of the universe. The Doctor finds a man called Orson Pink, a pioneer from the 22nd century, who was part of humanity's first attempt at time travel. They tried to transport him to next week, but things went a little wrong, and he ended up at the end of the universe. Can you imagine how scary that must be? To end up at the end of creation itself, all alone. At least, you think you're alone. Orson seems genuinely terrified at the thought of spending one more night in his ship. Not just annoyed that he has to say, genuinely terrified. But why? Isn't he alone? What could be outside to scare the last man in the universe? Unless something else survived. Something specifically evolved to remain hidden. But what would they do when everyone else was gone? What would the last person in the universe do if they heard knocking on the door? We never know what was out there, if there was anything out there. Except for the fact that expanded media claims it was Captain Jack and Riversong messing with Orson, Because, why not explain something that was supposed to be unexplained? The TARDIS takes Clara to Gallifrey, in the barn where the Doctor lived as a child. And Clara finds out why the Doctor is so fixated on this theory. She caused it. She gave him a speech about how fear is a superpower, even saying,
"Fear makes companions of us all."
A line said by the first Doctor, back in the 60s.
Fear makes companions of all of us.
A lot of people don't like the scene because,
Clara is so important and is better than the Doctor.
But this hardly changes the overall lore of the show. It establishes where the Doctor's fear in this episode came from and gave additional context to one line from the 60s. That's it. There's a listen reason is so highly regarded. What? The angel is full of forests. There's a reason listen is so highly regarded. It just completely does its own thing, and man, it hits. It balances all the right amounts of fear, mystery, and comedy. The fact that even after everything, there's still some level of ambiguity about whether there really was anything worth worrying about, or whether the whole episode is just based on fear of the unknown, is brilliant. Moffat is no stranger to weaponizing our childhood fears against us, but Listen does it in a way unlike any other. With things like the Vashta Nerada, our seemingly irrational fear of the dark is justified, because as it turns out, there is something living in the darkness. But here, we never get that certainty, and it just adds so much to the episode. Clara's juggling between her two lives reaches a breaking point in The Caretaker. We start with a montage of Clara just getting out of a life or death situation to then immediately return to a casual life, developing her relationship with Danny. This double life is too much for her, but she convinces herself to keep going. Both of these parts of her life mean too much to her, and she can't just drop one for the other. That, and she knows the Doctor and Danny wouldn't get along if they met. But at least those two lives are separate. Things could really go wrong if her two lives clashed. Oh, the episode itself is fine for Gareth Roberts standards, but the most important aspect of this episode is that Clara's whole double life finally blows up in her face. The Doctor and Danny finally meet, and the Doctor is very egotistical in this scene. He can't accept the concept of a former soldier being a maths teacher. This new Doctor has utter contempt for soldiers, possibly because of his reminder of the Time War, followed by hundreds of years defending a town from what you could argue were armies of soldiers. Or possibly because this Doctor is a lot more pragmatic with his attitude and solutions, and thus leans way more into the soldier stereotype of shoot first, ask questions later. And then, the Doctor assumes Clara's boyfriend is another teacher called Adrian, because he looks like the 11th Doctor. Eventually, it all falls apart when Danny unintentionally disrupts the Doctor's plan to get rid of the Skovok Splitzer. At this point, the gig is up, and Clara really should just come clean and try and salvage any trust Danny and the Doctor still have in her. But she doesn't. She tries lying to Danny again, trying to convince him that the robot was just a costume for a school play. But Danny isn't stupid, and all he wants from Clara is the truth. But she can't even give him that. This excuse is obviously done out of desperation, but it wouldn't surprise me if Clara genuinely believed that this would be convincing. She's begun to get in way over her head, and got so confident that she could keep these two lives separate. Danny doesn't care that Clara goes off with this guy into time and space. What matters to him is that she didn't tell him about this. He perceives this as a sign that she doesn't consider him meaningful enough to her to know about this. That she didn't tell him about her adventures because she thought less of him. It's an understandable assumption to make on Danny's part, but in all fairness, Clara really couldn't have known how he'd respond to all this if she told him of her own volition. Plus, the Doctor doesn't like soldiers, so she was rightfully worried they wouldn't get on. I love how, throughout this entire scene, we never see Danny's reflection, only Clara's, showing how she's in two minds about everything. These are her two separate lives clashing, and she finally has to look herself in the mirror, wondering how she can make these lives coexist. Then, as opposed to her taking advantage of Danny's trust, she takes advantage of the Doctor's trust, letting Danny sneak into the TARDIS while invisible to see what the Doctor and Clara really act like. Things don't really work out, and the Doctor and Danny, of course, get into a fight. But Danny knows what buttons to push this time. As he says at the end of the episode, he served under people like the Doctor, and can tell that the Doctor's disdain for soldiers is almost entirely projection, saying that the Doctor's the one who lights the fire. Now they've both got the wrong idea of each other, but there is a slight element of truth in what Danny's saying here, especially given the previous 2 episodes, where the entire plot was orchestrated by the Doctor, or how he sacrificed that soldier in Into the Dalek. There are times where the Doctor will happily risk sacrificing others, knowing the danger won't apply to him, similar to an army general. At the end of the episode, Danny helps defeat the Skovok Splitzer, and the Doctor starts to respect him a little more. Danny makes Clara promise that she'll tell him if the Doctor ever pushes her too far. But come on, surely that wouldn't happen. Right? Episode 7. It happened. Okay, Kill the Moon is definitely an episode that exists. Honestly, I would put it in my bottom 10 New Who episodes. I'm not going to go too much into why it sucks, I'm just bringing it up because it serves as a significant point in Series 8's narrative. So, it turns out the moon is an egg. Not going into too much detail. And there's a living thing inside it, about to hatch. But if that happened, the moon would explode, which would cause chaos on Earth. The episode ends up unintentionally sending an anti-abortion message. At least, I hope it was unintentional. The Doctor decides that this decision is humanity's to make. Yeah, fair enough, I get why he'd think that. But then he runs away, leaving the other characters to make the decision on their own. The Doctor has already been cold throughout this series, but for him to suddenly nope out 2/3 into an episode because he doesn't think he should have a say in this decision is incredibly selfish and unfair on the others. Particularly Clara, who's been left with this responsibility with a schoolgirl.
That was me respecting you.
Oh my god, really? Was it? Yeah, well, respected is not how I feel.
Danny's comment about the Doctor being the one who lights the fire suddenly becomes a chilling bit of foreshadowing. The Doctor's actions throughout Series 8 have been building up to this decision, and while I think it was a bit too far, even for the cold and uncaring 12th Doctor, Clara's unfiltered rage at the end makes it worth it. I've said before that I'm fine with the Doctor making morally questionable decisions as long as those decisions are brought into question, or they get called out on it. Clara has had enough of this new Doctor, how he just seems to see her as a soldier he can throw into difficult situations while he sits back and gathers all the information. The Doctor's attitude in the series thus far has been called out before, but Clara has just bit her tongue and put up with it. But here, she completely loses it, telling him she's done with him, and it feels so earned. At first, he can't seem to understand why Clara is angry. He thinks this decision was him respecting her, showing just how far gone and delusional he's truly become. This outburst from Clara was a much-needed reality check for the Doctor. The next episode, Mummy on the Orient Express, is easily my favourite episode of the series, and one of my favourite episodes of all time. The episode sets itself up perfectly in the cold open. Old woman sees invisible mummy, and it kills her. Possibly alien. Possibly schizophrenic? Oh, and the train is in space. Did I mention the train? Anyway, the Doctor arrives and, wait a minute, Clara is there. But she hates him. She just wrote a twit longer about how much she hates him. Well, Clara decided it wasn't best to end things on a slammed door, so she agreed to one last trip. But she just can't keep up with this new Doctor. His attitude towards everything and him constantly putting her in dangerous situations, things she doesn't think the 11th Doctor would do to her in a million years. She's really tried to accept him, but can't. She can't understand the reckless way he handles situations, and has a life with Danny that she really wants to commit to. So, she decides to call it quits here. Meanwhile, the Doctor just wants to info dump about planets. The 12th Doctor is my spirit animal.
I'm your worst nightmare.
A mystery shopper. Oh, great.
Really? That's your worst... Okay, I'm mystery shopper.
The Doctor does some investigating into the murders that have been happening on the train, and we meet Perkins, the chief engineer. I love this character, and I love his relationship with the Doctor. They're such a good pairing, always matching each other's snarkiness and observation. Perkins truly seems like a match for the 12th Doctor, and with Clara supposedly leaving at the end of the episode, It seems like Perkins is being set up to be her replacement.
Passenger manifests, plan of the train, and a list of stops for the past 6 months.
Quick work, Perkins. Maybe too quick.
Yes, sir. I'm obviously the mummy. Or perhaps I was already looking into this.
Then we find out what the mummy is. A mythical being called the Foretold. Once you see it, you have 66 seconds to live, and you can't run from it. This is all given in a rather smooth exposition dump when the Doctor starts asking Professor Morehouse about the Foretold. It's kind of twisted in a way, seeing these two discussing the Foretold like two kids telling a ghost story, all while the Foretold is real and is currently killing someone. Meanwhile, Clara is locked in a room with Maisie, the woman whose grandmother died at the start of the episode. They both share their stories and offer words of advice to each other. Even though her grandma was clearly quite abrasive and rude, her sudden death has got her going through all kinds of feelings and thoughts. I mean, that's one way to react to your horrible grandma dying. Clara tells Maisie about the Kill the Moon debacle, and Maisie wonders why Clara didn't call it quits then and there. Clara says you can't end something on a slammed door, but Maisie questions why Clara chose to go on a train with the Doctor after all that. It makes Clara think. Maybe she doesn't want to give it all up. If she really did, why didn't she do it straight away? She even says earlier in the episode that she assumed the Doctor would still come round every once in a while. It seems she doesn't actually want to call it quits. It turns out the whole train is a fake, a trap set up to lure a bunch of scientists and mythology experts into one place to study and stop the Foretold. Who set this up? We don't know, but they've got a seemingly sentient interface called Gus to orchestrate everything. I really like Gus. The whole polite, well-spoken, evil robot thing really makes him stand out as a villain. It's very Douglas Adams. So, they have no choice but to play along. But the problem is, none of them can see the Foretold. Unless they're about to die. So all they can realistically do is let people get picked off one by one, and try and garner information from people who only have seconds to live. It's beautifully twisted, and the exact kind of scenario Series 8 Doctor was made for. His attitude of not allowing anyone to stop and mourn the dead is once again cruel and cold, but it makes sense. He's been put into this incredibly tough situation. He has no choice but to make morally grey decisions and be dismissive of those who die. Even though it's obvious that the Doctor needs to stop the Foretold, it makes you wonder whether the ends really justify the means, and whether the Doctor's attitude is perhaps too cold and unfeeling. A nuanced plot on its own is already a sign of a great story in my opinion, but what makes it even better is when it makes you think, what would I do in this situation? And I think Mummy on the Orient Express does that really well. The Doctor's pitiless attitude here is one thing, but he also gets Clara to act like him, to lie and risk others' lives as a means to an end. They've deduced that Maisie is the next victim of the Foretold, and the Doctor needs to get her to the lab so he can make his next move, and possibly end this. So to get her there while causing as minimal fuss as possible, he gets Clara to lie, and say that he can save her, even though he isn't sure he actually can. The Doctor then admits that he knew this wasn't gonna just be a relaxing trip. Gus had been trying to lure him onto the Orient Express for ages. I think the reason he chose now of all times to finally go was because he knew there was gonna be some kind of danger. If he'd just chosen some random planet or space cruise, there might have been no danger, and Clara would have just left, with basically no chance of changing her mind. With this trip, he possibly saw it as a last chance to prove himself to Clara, to remind her of the fun adventure aspect of their journeys, and that he can still be a hero. Obviously, it didn't quite go to plan, and Clara is angry with him for knowingly luring her into danger, and getting her to lie for him. In the end, the Doctor manages to save Maisie, and risks his own life, having the mummy go for him so he can put an end to it all. He then also saves everyone on the train from suffocating as Gus removes all the oxygen. The Doctor and Clara are sitting on a beach, and the Doctor has one last chance to prove himself to Clara. He explains his motivations, how his only real choice was to make the most of the resources around him. Yeah, some people died, but if he didn't do anything, more people would have died. This outcome wasn't a perfect one, but it was one of the best realistic outcomes under the circumstances. He was put in this difficult situation, he just had to make the most of it. But then Clara asks,
So you were pretending to be heartless?
but the Doctor doesn't have an answer. He isn't entirely sure. But either way, Clara begins to understand the Doctor's perspective a little more. He doesn't particularly want to let others die, but that's life in the TARDIS. Sometimes you have to make difficult decisions because the alternative is so much worse.
Sometimes the only choices you have are bad ones. But you still have to choose.
Back in the TARDIS, the Doctor tries to get Perkins to join him. He still needs someone to travel with, but Perkins refuses. Clara asks the Doctor if he enjoys making these impossible choices. He sort of dances around the subject, but it seems like he doesn't really. Clara asks if it's like an addiction to him, because that's what the adventures are to her, an addiction. We've seen her struggle to give this life up in exchange for her life with Danny, but can't because she enjoys the adventure too much. After a brief phone call with Danny, she makes the final decision, pausing for a second, wondering if this is really what she wants to do, before taking a deep breath and lying to the Doctor. Not only saying Danny is fine with the two of them traveling, but saying it was Danny's idea they stop in the first place, which I find kinda hard to believe. It really is an addiction for her, and she can't give it up. This is the beginning of the descent of their friendship, as it becomes incredibly toxic, and they both become incredibly reliant on each other. Clara goes against her better judgment and continues traveling, and the Doctor goes against his better judgment, and doesn't tell her to go before things go too far again, because he doesn't want to be alone. And thus, a new chapter in their lives begins. The next episode, Flatline, wastes no time in setting up where Clara's character will go from here. The TARDIS is shrunk down to the size of a toy. Wait a minute, I've got one of those. I wonder if he's in here. It's really hard to do one-handed. Aww. I mean, come on, are you telling me you wouldn't want a mini Peter Capaldi in your room? Anyway, the Doctor is stuck inside, and Clara needs to fix this before he gets sold at B&M. There are only 3 Doctor Who items being sold at B&M right now? Bro, what happened? So, Clara gets all the Doctor's gadgets, and has to be him for the episode. After the Orient Express, Clara begins to realize, hey, this guy's actually pretty cool and badass and a hero, and starts trying to act more like him. And this episode is the catalyst that really gets that arc going. Clara really takes initiative, trying to act exactly like she thinks the Doctor would. There's also a point where she tells the Doctor she's gonna give hope to the others, make them believe they're gonna survive, because people who think they're doomed won't even try. She straight up says that's what the Doctor would do. I mean, hell, that's basically what he did in the prior episode. She also, once again, tries and fails to lie to Danny, saying everything is fine while fighting for her life, and sounding a little sus in the process.
Sounds, kind of active.
At the end of the episode, we get an interaction similar to the end of Into the Dalek. Clara says,
I was the Doctor and I was good.
And the Doctor says,
Goodness had nothing to do with it.
Mirroring the Doctor's conversation with Rusty, where both potential meanings of good are used. Clara uses it in the sense of she was good at being the Doctor, but the Doctor interprets it as she acted good while being the Doctor. But he doesn't consider goodness an inherent part of being the Doctor, especially since Clara still did questionable things while cosplaying as the Doctor, like lying to the side characters and giving them hope when there was no guarantee of them surviving. We also see that Missy hacked into the camera filming the episode and says,
Clara, I have chosen well.
Whatever could this mean? Well, onto the series finale. Apparently, oh, for fuck's sake. Okay, you've also got In the Forest of the Night. Honestly, for the most part, this episode is passable. It's nothing amazing by any stretch of the imagination, but it serves as a lighter episode preceding the pretty dark finale. Except, so this episode is about as pro-environment as you can get. Yeah, trees are cool. I agree. Very based. But then the episode also ends up sending the message that it's bad to take your medication. A message that was shamelessly stolen from the hit 2021 song Mask by Dream. With this and the anti-abortion message in Kill the Moon, Series 8 really did screw up its messaging, intentional or not. I don't know, maybe Orphan 55 wasn't so bad after all. There is quite a good scene in this episode, though, where Clara tells the Doctor to go and leave the Earth while it comes to an end. This whole interaction is a great parallel to the ending of Kill the Moon. There, Clara was angry at the Doctor and told him to go away. But here, she accepts what she presumes to be Earth's fate and tells him to go and save the next one. The Doctor even repeats what Clara said to him in that episode.
You walk our Earth, Doctor. You breathe our air.
I walk your earth. I breathe your air.
It shows how Clara has become more accepting of the Doctor since then, and the Doctor has mellowed slightly and come to Clara's way of thinking. The Earth is essentially his planet too. He can't just abandon it whenever a major event is happening. But yeah, apart from that, I don't really have much to say about this episode. It basically copies the endings of School Reunion and Robot of Sherwood, but way worse. Yeah, anyway, now, on to the series finale. Apparently, people don't like this finale. I cannot understand why for a second, so if that's you, allow me to explain why you are wrong. And stinky. Stinky and wrong. The episode begins with Clara and Danny on the phone. Danny is on his way to Clara's apartment, and Clara is finally gonna be honest with him. About the adventures, about her whole life, about who she is. Okay, this is very sudden, I'm sorry if this seems a bit disjointed, but I was just editing this video, and I was looking at all the post-it notes in Clara's room, and one of them says 3 months. Now, I'm not sure what exactly this means. Did she perhaps have another surprise for Danny? But yeah, I'm not really sure what this means, and it's kind of strange that it never really went anywhere. This is the day they properly define their relationship, and Clara literally can't wait for Danny to get there. But then...
The car, it just came out of nowhere. I'm so sorry.
Before she even knows it, he's dead. He gets hit by a car and dies without Clara being there. This whole beginning is so good. How Clara runs to the scene, but as soon as she gets there, it transitions to a little while later, and in the blink of an eye, it's over. The world carries on. This is just a perfect representation of how it feels to lose a loved one. Funnily enough, of all places, I think it was put best in Peter K's car share.
The world just doesn't stop turning because somebody dies, love. I know you might want it to, but it doesn't.
Even Clara's Nan's greeting of
"Hello, love. You're right."
is just so typical and ordinary. And all Clara can focus on is the ordinariness of Danny's death. She's so used to these adventures in time and space, watching people die at the hands of merciless gun-wielding aliens, or invisible immortal soldiers, or people getting flattened and their anatomy examined by beings from another dimension. But this? It was nothing in comparison. And yet, it means everything to her. Clara demands the Doctor save Danny. She steals all the spare TARDIS keys and throws them into what she believes to be a pool of lava. She knows it's impossible, yet her massive overconfidence and controlling nature that's been exacerbated throughout the series results in her believing she can take charge, that she can get the Doctor to do whatever she wants. She believes she's owed it, from the man who caused all the tension in her relationship from the start. And she does it. She's so blinded by grief and anger and revenge that she throws away all of the TARDIS keys. And the post-burn clarity hits hard. It turns out the Doctor knew it was all an illusion, and let Clara's fantasy play out to see how far she would go. Despite Clara betraying the Doctor, despite her taking advantage of his trust and showing how she would genuinely sacrifice his whole life to get her own way, he helps her. He agrees to help look for Danny. That's how much the Doctor cares about Clara. I know some people say this is weird from the Doctor, but a similar thing happened in Father's Day. Just like the Doctor cared about Rose, he cares about Clara. I mean, she jumped into his time stream and saved his life countless times, convinced the Time Lords to save him from death, and helped steer him back on track when he made bad decisions. It's clear Clara means a lot to the Doctor, and he can see the strong, independent person she's starting to become, and isn't gonna let her betrayal of trust ruin that. just like she didn't let the events of Kill the Moon ruin her relationship with him. So, Clara fingers the TARDIS again, and they go to the 3W Institute, which is apparently where dead people go. This episode is brilliantly dark, easily one of the darkest episodes of New Who. It turns out all the minds of dead people are being uploaded to a special little hard drive. Wait, I think I've seen this before. So, someone has been uploading dying minds to a Gallifreyan hard drive. But these minds are still connected to their old bodies, and can feel everything that happens to them. A scientist called Dr. Scarosa believed he could hear the voices of the dead in TV static. And there was one phrase he kept hearing. One repeating phrase from these voices that made him set up the 3W Institute.
Don't cremate me. Don't cremate me.
So, this episode begins with Clara's boyfriend being hit by a car and dying, and then we find out that dead people can feel their bodies being cremated. This is like genuinely Torchwood levels of dark, possibly darker than Torchwood. It was to the point where the episode became the most complained about in the whole of New Who, receiving over 100 complaints from viewers, with the BBC putting out a pretty weird response, saying that it's okay because the whole thing is confirmed to be a con. But it isn't. It doesn't matter what the actual purpose of 3W is, it still has actual dead people living in the Nethersphere. This is an afterlife, and the pain these people experience when being cremated, or leaving their body to science, is real. So I don't really get that, despite how much this story tries to reassure you that the whole thing is a con or paranoia. We see the inside of the Nethersphere through the eyes of Danny, as he discovers that he's been sent into this dark, metropolitan sphere. The design of the Nethersphere strikes a perfect balance between surreal and drab. The atmosphere of these scenes is largely carried by Seb, played by Chris Addison, who starred alongside Capaldi in the thick of it, which just makes it all the more painful that the two never interact in this story. Danny really has a tough time in this episode. First he dies, then he's forced to confront a dark part of his past, as we see why he had such a strong reaction when asked if he'd ever killed anyone who wasn't a soldier. It turns out he unintentionally shot a child in a war zone, which also explains why he would stop at nothing to protect all the kids in the Forest of the Shite. Eventually, Clara manages to contact Danny, and the Doctor tells her to be skeptical. This could easily be a trick, especially since the Doctor is so convinced the whole thing is a con. Clara tells Danny that nothing will stop her from getting to him, as soon as she knows he isn't an imposter. But Danny knows there's only one way for her to get to him, and of course he doesn't want Clara to do that. But we've seen, especially earlier in this episode, the lengths Clara is willing to go to get what she wants, so you can't completely put it past her. So Danny puts Clara before himself, getting her to hang up the call, knowing this means he'll never see her again. I love how the reveal of the Cybermen is built up throughout the episode. There are clues there from the moment the Doctor and Clara enter the Institute, like how the 3W logo looks like a Cyberman eye. But then the Doctor enter the lift, and the Cyberman theme plays as the doors close. The idea of dead people being turned into Cybermen is such a cool concept, and really feels like a fresh direction to take the Cybermen in while not forgetting about their core concept. I know this plot sorta leans into the whole zombie apocalypse trope that was everywhere back when this episode came out, but I think this is a unique spin on the concept, and it doesn't just feel like the show is hopping on a trend. We then find out Missy is a Time Lord. But which one?
Who's that?
Time Lord.
It's the Roddy!
It's the Master.
Missy really hits her stride in Series 10, but she's still great in Series 8 and 9. I'll have more to say about her in a minute, but this reveal is really cool. There's a cool reference to the invasion, with the Cybermen marching down the stairs outside St. Paul's Cathedral, with Clara trapped inside with the Cyberman Dr. Scarosa, which is something I only noticed when I watched the episode for this video. And finally, with Danny, about to delete his emotions, so he doesn't have to suffer with the reality of letting Clara go. It's a great ending to a brilliantly dark episode. Clara tries to convince the Cybermen that Clara Oswald never existed, that she's really the Doctor. Look, her name even appears first in the opening titles, so it must be true. Bet the Cybermen felt really stupid when they saw that. I mean, of course, Clara haters jumped for joy at another opportunity to misunderstand her arc here. Clara has already started to act like the Doctor. She's been growing in independence throughout this series, and it's resulted in this. She already believes she's good at acting like the Doctor, and sees it as her best bet of survival. If you're wondering why the door was closing at the start of this scene, it's because there was a deleted scene where Clara was sat in this container and lies about having one heart or something. There was also this deleted scene.
Doctor in the TARDIS.
I have no idea where this was supposed to fit into the episode. I like to imagine it was just before the Doctor travels to Gallifrey's coordinates. Meanwhile, UNIT spawns in, and kidnap the Doctor and Missy. Then the Cybermen explode, and spread water all across the UK, which gets everywhere, converting all dead people into Cybermen. Including Danny Pink, whose emotional inhibitor hasn't activated, and he goes to find Clara. I like the brief showcases of emotion that Danny shows, like the "correct" line, or how he crumples the paper in his hand when Clara gives a speech about how the Doctor is the person that means the most to her, not realizing it's Danny she's saying it to. You really feel his pain. Now he's finally seen what Clara is like when he's not around, and it kills him. Poor choice of words.
You think your father would have done this?
We both know he absolutely would.
No, he definitely wouldn't. As for Missy, she's brilliant. Michelle Gomez's performance is perfect, pulling off a perfect balance of the Master's iconic charisma and insanity while bringing her own spin on the character. But why did the two guards behind her do literally nothing when she was undoing her handcuffs? Or when she holds Osgood at gunpoint? But yeah, I do like the reveal that Missy has been manipulating the Doctor's life, ensuring he and Clara stay together because she knows Clara will push the Doctor further and further. She wants the Doctor to become corrupted by power. She wants him to be like her. The Master has always been somewhat jealous of the Doctor, and the Spy Master, who comes before Missy and I will not be told otherwise, tried getting the Doctor to be more like him, once again, out of jealousy. And here, she tries getting the Doctor to be like her. We've seen how she's been subtly guiding his adventures recently, and honestly, it's not far-fetched to believe she was the one behind Gus. She could have intentionally set up this specific situation to get the Doctor to sacrifice a bunch of lives for a greater cause, getting him to make these morally questionable decisions to prepare him for this finale. That, and also Gus knew the TARDIS phone number. How many other people in the universe know that? Then the Doctor falls. Wait, but then he skydives into the TARDIS, which is quite cool. This scene, however, is not so cool, in that the Doctor acts very weird. The Doctor needs to know what the plan is for the Cybermen, but he can't know unless he enables Danny's emotional inhibitor. So he gets Clara to enable it, and essentially kill Danny. Why? I like the dynamic between the Doctor and Danny, with Danny criticizing him for acting like a general, but this feels a little forced. Then, it turns out the plan is for the rain to fall again, but this time, it will kill everyone currently alive on Earth, and turn them into Cybermen. I feel like this is glossed over way too quickly. I never really thought about this moment until I watched the episode for this video. This plan is very blink and you'll miss it. Then Missy turns up, Mary Poppins style, and finally explains what all this was for. To give the Doctor an army. To corrupt him and turn him power-hungry and evil, like she is. This is where the Doctor's good man arc culminates, and I'll be completely honest, it leaves a bit to be desired. I mean, it seems like this is sort of an epiphany for the Doctor, as he finally remembers who he is and what he does. He's just the Doctor. He travels around the universe, tries to do good, and learns new things along the way. I like that conclusion, but in all honesty, I kinda get the vibe they weren't sure how to end this arc, and it comes across a bit disjointed. Anyway, the Cybermen go boom. The Doctor is fine with killing Missy, but not Danny, because yes. And then... no. Anyway, I think the ending of this episode is where things really make a recovery. Danny opens up a gateway from the dying Nethersphere to Earth, but there's only enough power for one trip before the afterlife closes. Danny could save himself, but he doesn't. He saves the boy he killed all those years ago. We've seen how guilty he felt over that, how it shaped him and his protectiveness over others, and so he sacrifices his last chance of freedom to make up for what he did. As a side, a lot of people say Danny's character is boring, but that's kind of the point. Throughout Series 8, Danny is portrayed as the other life Clara could lead. The life where she gives up all the adventure and danger and lives a peaceful life with someone who chose just the same. He's not full-time companion material, and that's fine, because he isn't meant to be. The Doctor and Clara meet up, and both lie to each other. Clara lies that Danny is still alive, and she's gonna commit to that life with him. And the Doctor lies, saying he found Gallifrey, while we see what actually happened. He went looking for it, but it wasn't there, and it breaks him. This is honestly a really powerful scene. So, they agree to call it quits there, lying to protect each other, and hiding the pain they're really going through. Honestly, if Clara's adventures with the Doctor ended here, that would have worked. But Jenna Coleman ended up staying into Series 9, which I'm also fine with, as Clara's development continues in an interesting way in that series. Overall, I think the beginning and end of Death in Heaven are the best parts. Everything in between can feel a bit disjointed, but the performances are great, the directing is great, and I still find it to be an enjoyable ride overall. I do think it's the weakest finale of this era by a mile though. Then there's a post-credits scene, where Santa shows up, played by Nick Frost. Hey, you've got red on you. This really reminds me of the endings of Series 2 and 3, and I like it. It segues into Last Christmas, which is a really good episode, and the final Christmas special in the Moffat era where it being Christmas actually has a significant impact on the plot. The majority of the episode is within a dream, which allows Clara to properly spend time with Danny one last time in an impactful way. Then, at the end, the Doctor and Clara decide to keep traveling together. They were gonna go their separate ways before things went too far, but they just can't give each other up. A mentality that massively affects them in the future. And thus, we head into Series 9. Series 8 was an interesting direction to take the show in. It truly felt like something unique, while still being Doctor Who. It clearly sets itself, and the era as a whole, up as a character-focused era at the beginning, with the brilliance that is Deep Breath. The show really pushed itself with out there concepts in Listen. The Doctor-companion relationship was put to the test halfway through, and began heading in an interesting direction towards the end of the series. The show's messaging was a bit weird sometimes, and the finale felt like a bit of a mess at times, but overall, I consider Series 8 a very solid series. It perfectly sets up the more mature and nuanced themes that would persist throughout this era. Honestly, I think this series is the weakest of the Capaldi era, which is a testament to just how much I adore his tenure. Reviews of Series 8 were good. The main things praised by the critics were the freshness of Peter Capaldi's performance compared to previous New Who Doctors, as well as the darkness of episodes like Dark Water. The show also won an IGN Best Television Award for Best Sci-Fi Series, and a BAFTA for Best Visual Effects, as well as being nominated for several other awards. Ratings were also very solid, with Deep Breath getting over 9 million viewers, and the rest of the series averaging over 7.5 million viewers, about the same as the show had consistently achieved since 2005. Opinions within the fandom were a bit mixed. Some people loved the series, once again appreciating the freshness compared to what came before, with episodes like Listen, Mummy on the Orient Express, and Flatline becoming fan favourites. However, some people weren't so convinced, and made the assertion that Capaldi was a great Doctor let down by bad writing, before refusing to elaborate and leaving to go watch Series 2. You know, the pinnacle of quality Doctor Who. This bad writing shtick that I will generously refer to as a formulated opinion really bothers me. So many people say this about the Capaldi era as a whole, but then just won't give any examples. This proclamation of piss still affects the perception of this era, even now, from people who either didn't watch it, or simply didn't understand the narratives and arcs being conveyed. There was also the common criticism of the show being all about Clara. How it was Clara Who now, but like... No, Clara has been growing in confidence in Series 8, trying to be more like the Doctor. She doesn't become better than him, and the show simply doesn't revolve around her, excluding Flatline, but that episode is a pivotal point in her development. It's fair enough if you don't like Clara as a character, but saying the show became Clara Who just shows you don't even understand her arc. Now, you might be wondering, how are you going to get the video out of this hole? And that is a good question. On to Series 9. Now, personally, I consider Series 3 to 5 to be the original golden age of New Who. I think that's when the show was consistently at its best. But I easily consider Series 9 and 10 to be New Who's second golden age. I adore both of these series so much, it's a problem. And now I'm gonna make it your problem too. Looking at the episode list for Series 9, you can see it's quite different to what came before. The Series 8 finale was the first two-part story since Series 6's The Rebel Flesh and The Almost People back in 2011. And all of a sudden, Series 9 has 4 stories that are 2 parts long, and a 3-part finale, leaving only one standalone episode in the entire series. Personally, I love this change. One of the most frustrating things about New Who is that most episodes are only 45 minutes to an hour long. It can really make things feel rushed at times. But this allows for a perfect opportunity to flesh out the stories a lot more, help us get to know the characters more. Heaven send. Another change that I still don't understand though was the BBC's scheduling of the programme during the Capaldi era. And this is a problem that affected Series 8 as well as 9. Since the 70s, Doctor Who had pretty much always aired between 6 and 7 PM, 7:30 at the latest. But during Series 8 and 9, the show began airing between 8 and 8:30 PM. The BBC airing their flagship family show at a time where it would literally air post-Watershed just seems like a bizarre choice to me. The Capaldi era is a lot darker and more mature, sure, but not enough to justify that time slot if you ask me. Thankfully, things went back to normal in Series 10, but I do wonder if this change contributed to the slight drop in ratings in Series 9. But anyway, it's about time to dive into Capaldi's second series. Let's get into the peak. Series 9 begins with The Magician's Apprentice, which I think is a brilliant opening. One thing I love about this episode is that it feels like a finale. Series 8 was just the warm-up, and now we're getting into the big stuff. We begin on a muddy battlefield, almost looking like World War I, until the lasers firing out of the planes tell us this probably isn't Earth. We see some soldiers running until one notices a boy running away, and goes to help. He then gets slurped underground by a hand mine, and the boy is left alone, surrounded by dozens of these things that will kill him if he tries to move. Then, the Doctor shows up, throwing the boy his sonic screwdriver so they can talk. The Doctor gives the boy inspiration, telling him that he has a 1 in 1,000 chance of surviving, but 1 is all you ever need. He then asks the boy for his name, and in response, the boy says,
Davros. My name is Davros.
This is such a good reveal. A classic philosophical debate is the question of whether you could kill a certain dictator if you found him as a child. This was even referenced the first time Davros appeared in Doctor Who. And yeah, you could save millions of lives, but this is just a kid who's done nothing wrong. Is it justified to sentence him to death because of who he'll grow up to be? This reality breaks the Doctor, and he abandons young Davros. And it doesn't matter whether you think he was justified in doing this. It goes against everything the Doctor stands for. And he knows this. The consequences catch up to him as Davros searches for the Doctor. The Doctor is confident that he won't survive his next encounter with Davros, and throws himself a 3-week party, which I'll get to in a bit. Back on Earth, all the planes have stopped. You'd assume this was the work of Davros and his assistant, Colony Sarf, especially since the prior scene had Davros telling Sarf that the way to seek the Doctor is to seek his friends. But no, it was orchestrated by Missy, simply to get Clara and Unit's attention. Once again, this really shows the scope of the episode, as this plot point of all the planes being frozen could have been its own Doctor Who episode, but it's confined to a smaller part of an overall narrative. Also yes, Missy is back, which the show shrugs off in an almost self-aware way.
Cutting to the chase, not dead, back, big surprise, never mind.
So Clara and Missy meet up, and Missy brings out the Doctor's confession dial, essentially a Time Lord's will, to be opened by their closest friend upon their death. I really like Clara and Missy's dynamic in these episodes. Missy is the one person who can give Clara a run for her money. She doesn't tolerate or succumb to Clara's ego like the Doctor. Clara clearly hates Missy and is definitely scared of her to some degree, but knows that she can't show it, as Missy thrives on how Clara lets her actions get to her. I do find this scene kinda dumb though, when Missy compares Clara's relationship with the Doctor to an old couple walking their dog, but there are tons of armed soldiers surrounding the area. How were these people allowed to walk through here? But whatever, it was probably the toy maker. We see how resourceful and confident Clara's becoming, as she calls Missy's bluff, stopping her from killing everyone, and then she thinks outside the box to find where the Doctor is. Now for possibly the most overhated scene in the entire Capaldi era. The Doctor has gone to 12th century Essex, and we see him rolling into a stadium, on a tank, playing an electric guitar. I've seen plenty of people say this was when they gave up on the show. People look at this scene and claim that this is how the Doctor acts for the entire series. And if that's you, then are you stupid? The Doctor does not act like this for the entire season. If you genuinely think that, you either didn't watch the rest of the series or didn't pay attention. The Doctor becomes less abrasive and dismissive in Series 9. There's a clear sign of character growth, but this scene in The Magician's Apprentice does not define his character. I'd maybe understand where people were coming from if this was the first we saw of the Doctor in this episode, but it isn't. The Doctor is filled with guilt from abandoning Davros. He knows that was a cowardly decision and isn't who he is at all. So he goes in the complete opposite direction. The episode even acknowledges how random this is. You know, Missy says Time Lords die with
meditation, repentance and acceptance,
contemplation of the absolute.
And she and Clara expect to find the Doctor being subtle, unnoticed. It's clear this is largely a distraction for himself, as the moment Clara reminds him he's gonna die, the facade completely drops for a moment. Eventually, the new Best TARDIS trio gets taken to a space station. Except it's actually Skaro.
Easy mistake.
Seeing the reactions of the Doctor and the usually confident and unfazed Missy really sells this reveal. Clara and Missy end up in a room full of Daleks. The Daleks don't have much of a presence in this story, but it's mainly a Davros story, so I can look past that. Oh my god, Dalek Sek is alive! Missy knows exactly what to do to get out of this. She tries bargaining for her life, offering to help the Daleks take control of the TARDIS. She knows they're too single-minded to listen and uses their lasers to escape. Clara, however, is left alone. She may have built up a lot more confidence over time, but that only gets her so far when she's surrounded by hateful murdering machines who won't listen to reason, who won't be fooled by any mind games she tries to play, and who won't succumb to her attitude. Davros gives a speech to the Doctor as they watch this, luxuriating in the primal instincts of the monsters he created, calling it
life at its purest.
It honestly gives me chills. Anyway, Clara gets shot, but also disappears. I'm sure that doesn't mean anything. And the Daleks destroy the TARDIS. I'm sure that also doesn't mean anything. Then, the episode ends with the Doctor back on the battlefield, pointing a gun at young Davros and saying he's gonna save his friend, the only way he can. We've seen just how far the Doctor is willing to go for Clara, but would he really go this far? The Magician's Apprentice is a very good episode. It constantly subverts your expectations, pulling out one twist after another. The stakes are set incredibly high, once again making it feel like a finale. The dynamics between the main characters are really entertaining. Michelle Gomez steals the show as Missy once again, and Missy as a character has improved a lot compared to her last appearance. I really enjoyed this episode, and if you hated it purely because of the guitar scene, I encourage you to give it another chance. And if you still don't like it, you're just wrong. I don't know what to tell you. Then, you've got The Witch's Familiar. I also like The Witch's Familiar. Until the ending. I'm gonna hold off on the Doctor and Davros scenes for now, and focus on the B-plot of Clara and Missy's silly little adventures. Once again, the dynamic is great. They end up in the Dalek sewers, and you're wondering, wait, Dalek shit? How? But then, Missy reveals that the Dalek sewers are filled with extremely old, decaying Daleks, genetically engineered to never die, but still aging. This is a pretty creepy reveal, and also shows the short-sightedness of Davros when he made the Daleks. His only thought was making a ruthless machine that would win the war, not what would happen afterwards. You almost feel bad for them. It's easy to forget the Daleks were once people, until an endless war changed and mutated them, and now their fate is rotting away in a sewer. They trap and kill a Dalek, and Missy tells Clara to get inside the tank. This keeps happening to Clara. A lot of people also don't like this scene because everything Clara says gets lost in translation by the Dalek filter. I've seen people say this could mean a Dalek was trying to be peaceful or begging for its life, but just ended up shouting, "Exterminate." But no, the whole point of the Daleks is they're genetically engineered to focus purely on hatred and killing. They simply don't have the capacity for any different emotions, so a human with their positive emotions wasn't considered in the construction of the tank. It's not that the Daleks can't express different emotions through the tank, no matter how hard they try. It's that the mutants themselves literally can't express different emotions. So what would be the point of having those emotional responses baked into the tank's speech filter? Alright, now for the Doctor and Davros. At this point, the Doctor believes Clara is dead, and he completely snaps, deciding to go God mode. He steals Davros's wheelchair and warns the Daleks that he has all the power Davros had, and will not hesitate to use it if Clara is really dead. This isn't even the first time we've seen the Doctor go this far. He once blew up an entire Cyber Legion just to find Amy. It further shows how toxic the Doctor and Clara's relationship is becoming, and how far they'll go for each other. But on top of that, it shows the beginning of the Doctor's development in this series. He starts toying with his own power. In Series 8, the Doctor mainly just made the most of his surroundings, trying to find the most pragmatic means to an end. But here, he starts going further, resorting to more drastic measures to get what he wants. Anyway, he gets choked by a bunch of snakes. You know, some people pay good money for this kind of thing. And now, we get to the main bit. The talking. The yapping. The waffling. Davros tries leading the Doctor into temptation, telling him he can stop the heartbeat of every Dalek on Skaro in one move. He knows the Doctor wouldn't usually do this, but he's seen the Doctor abandon a child on a battlefield, knowing it goes against everything he stands for. He also knows the Daleks have just killed Clara and destroyed the TARDIS. The Doctor has nothing left, and has already shown how far he's willing to go when he has nothing to lose. So Davros tempts him, knowing the Doctor would kill him too, but he would die content, knowing he brought the Doctor down to his level in the end. Davros also predicts the Doctor's compassion will kill him eventually. Not only is this likely unintentional foreshadowing to the Doctor Falls, but it's also technically already happened. Every New Who Doctor has regenerated as an act of self-sacrifice. The 9th Doctor absorbed the power of the Time Vortex to save Rose, the 10th Doctor died saving Wilf, and the 11th Doctor lived out the rest of what he presumed to be his final life in one town, defending a small group of people. Coupled with the 3rd, 4th, and 5th Doctors, the Doctor is no stranger to sacrificing themselves to save others. As Davros reaches the end of his life, he wonders about his relationship with the Doctor, their similarities and differences, and how they'll both die. Davros also brings up that the Doctor wouldn't have run away from Gallifrey out of boredom, or at least not run the way the Doctor has. This is both foreshadowing for the finale and also the introspection that occurs in Twice Upon a Time, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Eventually, the Doctor tells Davros that Gallifrey is back. It wasn't destroyed, and it's out there, somewhere. This is where things take a turn. Davros seems genuinely moved by this, and congratulates the Doctor. He tells the Doctor to
protect your own, as I have sought to protect mine.
Which, in a really weird, twisted way, makes you sympathize with him for creating the Daleks. His motivations were undeniably evil, but all he wanted to do was protect his own people from an endless war, by any means necessary. Davros wants to know the Doctor's final confession, and gives his own. We assumed his main motivation for creating the Daleks was universal domination, but it turns out his main motivation was fear of losing his own people. Davros asks if he's a good man, just like the Doctor did last series. Davros genuinely wonders if his heart was in the right place, crying as he reaches the end, desperate to know if he was right. Then, Davros makes a joke, and they both laugh. These two mortal enemies, at the end of an endless battle spanning millennia, are getting along, laughing together. This is brilliant. I love this. Why the fuck would you undo it all? Look, this whole video is just me shilling the Capaldi era to you, but this twist saddens me to no end. I adore the scene of the Doctor and Davros getting along. While writing this script, I really started to delve a lot deeper into the subtext and value of the scene, and it ended up making me appreciate it a lot more. Stephen Moffat genuinely made me emotional over Davros, only to undo all the meaning of the scene. It turns out the whole thing was a trap. Ooh, what a twist. But then it turns out the Doctor knew it was a trap, and let it happen anyway. So, was any of that conversation genuine? Or were they both just lying to each other to get what they wanted? And if that's the case, then what the fuck was the point in that prior scene? What's worse is there were still multiple ways this twist still could have happened without undoing any of the value of the previous scene. For example, what if Davros just didn't know Colony Soft had set the trap? Or what if Davros originally wanted to entrap the Doctor, but genuinely changed his mind due to their conversation? This scene is the one thing stopping this episode from being a brilliant character piece on the Doctor and Davros, and it doesn't anger me, it just disappoints me. The reason Davros did this was because of an old prophecy on Gallifrey, about a being called the Hybrid, a mix of two warrior races that would stand over the ruins of Gallifrey. Davros believes the Hybrid would be part Dalek, part Time Lord, and planned to give the Doctor's regeneration energy to all the Daleks to fulfill the prophecy. And this sets up the main arc of Series 9. Who or what is the Hybrid? And is the Doctor really that scared of the possibility of it existing? Yeah, then things backfire and the Daleks end up drowning in their decaying poop ancestors. And people say this show takes itself too seriously. I do like the bit where Davros genuinely goes to shake Missy's hand though. There's one last test of the Doctor's morality though, as Missy tries to convince the Doctor to kill the Dalek shell Clara is in. Once again, the Doctor's morals and how far he's willing to go when he has nothing to lose have already been tested in this episode. And this ties in with Missy's desire to convince the Doctor they're not so different. The Daleks are dying anyway, who would know? The Doctor doesn't fall for it though, because the Dalek says mercy, even though, by all accounts, there's no reason for the Daleks to know that word. So he gets Clara out, Missy escapes, zim zim zalabeam, and the Doctor makes up for his actions at the beginning of the story. He goes back and saves young Davros, as an act of mercy. He knows this child will grow up to create a race that will slaughter billions, including his own people. But, as far as he's concerned, that's no justification for abandoning a child on a battlefield. And maybe, by showing mercy, by being kind, by being the Doctor, he can have a positive influence on this child. And he does. Aside from that scene, I really enjoy this series opener. It feels so impactful, which perfectly sets up how out there and big Series 9 is going to be. The interactions between the Doctor and Davros in The Witch's Familiar are brilliant. It just really sucks that they're basically rendered meaningless. And also, the episode has Missy. Seriously, what more could you ask for? It establishes what the Doctor and Clara's respective arcs are going to be across this series, and the mention of the Hybrid subtly hints at how they'll intertwine. Up next is Under the Lake and Before the Flood. I adore this story. Like, it is up there with the Library two-parter as some of the best Doctor Who out there. And yet, no one talks about it. Well, I'm here to change that. It is good. And you will worship it. The cold open for this episode is near perfect. We see the crew we're about to become familiar with investigating a mysterious spacecraft. The two crew members who receive the most characterization at the start are Moran and Pritchard, and they're the first to die. So those two being the most fleshed out at the start helps make them seem like actual people, and not just side characters who need to die for the plot to happen. Anyway, yeah, Moran dies, engulfed in flames after a rather eloquently dressed ghost appears, just as they discover this spaceship with mysterious writing on the wall. After about 30 seconds, Moran reappears, but he's a ghost. I love the design of the ghosts. Their most defining creepy feature is easily the hollow eyes. It's very uncanny valley, something that looks human but is just off enough that it becomes unsettling, and the ghosts fit into that category perfectly. Coupled with the glowing mist that surrounds them and the sort of whispering sound they make, these things are genuinely creepy. While I'm talking about the characters, they are really well done. Excluding Moran because he gets spawn killed, this story handles 5 completely new crew members, plus the Doctor and Clara, and manages to make them all fleshed out characters. This is arguably the best example of Series 9 making the most of its predominantly 2-part stories. I like how they all have their little quirks that make them unique. Pritchard is selfish and money hungry, O'Donnell is a big fan of the Doctor, Bennett is a pussyo, and then there's Cass, whose main little quirk is being deaf. I'd say the one with the least characterization is Lun, who signs for Cass, but he's the only one who doesn't read the writing inside the spacecraft, so he's basically the Messiah. It's fine.
Will you please listen? I am not the Messiah, do you understand? Now, fuck off!
There's also a great moment of downtime in this episode, where the Doctor outright calls out Clara for getting in way over her head. He can see she's trying a little too hard to be like him, and is genuinely concerned, but unsure how to put his thoughts into words. We've already seen how this Doctor struggles to open up to others, and even though he's changed and grown a lot, it's still a struggle for him. So his attempt to reach out to Clara kinda falls flat. Something I love about this episode is just how well thought out and put together it is. The plot and the mystery surrounding it are done really well. The hints as to what's going on are done just right. Not too subtle, but just enough to keep you guessing. And just enough so that when everything does piece together, you're like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Like with the writing on the spacecraft. It really does remind me of the Library 2-parter, with a great premise and multiple mysteries that keep you guessing. It's just overall very solid Doctor Who. Eventually, they find out the ghosts are saying the same thing over and over, using Cass's ability to lip read. I like that Cass being deaf actually has an effect on the plot. It makes for a good representation for something you don't often see in media, and tackles the stereotype that disability is purely a hindrance. So the ghosts are giving rather vague coordinates, transmitting it for the friends of whatever is in the stasis chamber to find them. But the town has been flooded for nearly 130 years. How have they not arrived yet? Find out after the oh my god, he's dead! Okay, I don't care what anyone says. This is a sick cliffhanger. It was enough to completely stun 11-year-old me, and still goes incredibly hard for 19-year-old me. Like, yeah, we know the Doctor isn't actually going to die, but you could literally say that about any episode where the Doctor is in danger. It's more about the journey than the destination. As far as we know, these ghosts are real, and appear after someone dies. The Doctor's ghost only appearing as soon as he goes back in time fits really well with the narrative the show constantly pushes, that history is in flux, and the future can change at any moment. It really does make you wonder, how is the Doctor gonna get out of this one? The beginning of Before the Flood is awesome. What, you thought I was talking about Clara and the Doctor talking? No, the bootstrap paradox. Obviously. The episode begins with the Doctor giving a soliloquy about the bootstrap paradox. I mean, I would listen to Capaldi read the Facebook terms and conditions to me. The guy can make anything interesting. This isn't even random or out of character for the 12th Doctor. We've seen him talking out loud to himself multiple times, like in Listen or Mummy on the Orient Express or Flatline. It's what he does. He just enjoys info dumping, once again proving that he is my spirit animal. You could argue he isn't even breaking the fourth wall here, it just looks like it because that's where the camera is pointed. There's every chance he's just acting like he's talking to someone, or maybe even talking to Clara. Also, the electric guitar theme goes very, very hard, and you cannot deny that. Something I love about this episode is that it properly shows where the Doctor and Clara are headed in this series. The Doctor accepts that he's gonna die, but that isn't Clara's main concern. She doesn't care about the Doctor dying. She cares about the Doctor dying while she's still traveling with him. It's an incredibly selfish response, yeah, but it makes sense within her arc. After Danny dies, Clara loses her last tether to reality. Her one possible escape from the irreparable damage traveling with the Doctor will do. These adventures are the only thing she has left. The only thing giving her some sort of purpose or fulfillment. Of course she doesn't want to give it up. The last time she tried manipulating the Doctor into doing what she wanted, she gave him an ultimatum. But this time, she tries emotionally manipulating him instead. The Doctor's trick in Dark Water was supposed to make Clara feel guilty for taking advantage of his trust. But all it's done is show Clara that the Doctor will break the rules. He will go to hell for her. So she tells him to break the rules. To survive. For her. The Doctor's morality, like in the series opener, is tested a lot here. He finds out that his ghost is saying something different to the others. It's saying the names of everyone in the episode, so you literally aren't allowed to forget any of them. Moran, Pritchard, Apprentice, O'Donnell. Apprentice, the eloquently dressed chap, was just killed by the now-awake Fisher King, leading the Doctor to believe his ghost was listing everyone in the order they die. To make sure, though, he lets O'Donnell go alone when the Fisher King starts chasing them all. He'd originally tried to get her to stay in the TARDIS to see if he could prevent her death and change the future, but it didn't work. And sure enough, O'Donnell gets killed. This action is very reminiscent of how the Doctor would act in Series 8, treating others like chess pieces he can use to find out more about what he's up against. In this case, it was to test whether the list was legit. But when Bennett calls the Doctor out for knowing this and not saying anything, rather than dismissing O'Donnell's death as a necessary sacrifice for a greater cause, he says,
"I'm changing history to save Clara."
Once again showing that their relationship is becoming super toxic, how they're constantly willing to go too far for each other. I refuse to reuse the joke I made here in the original Capaldi video, go away. But then, the Doctor decides to change time, to refuse death due to Clara's influence on him. It shows how they're slowly becoming more and more like each other, constantly pushing each other too far, until they become almost indistinguishable. Almost like a hybrid. Anyway, the Doctor tries returning to the base to save Clara. He does not succeed. I like when the Doctor and Bennett are watching their past selves, and Bennett tries to go to O'Donnell, but the Doctor drags him back down, making a lot of noise. You can hear the noise earlier in the episode, but you probably don't even notice it until you rewatch the episode. It's just a nice little touch, and this episode is full of those. The B-plot isn't anything particularly noteworthy, just Clara, Lun, and Cass trying to survive with all the ghosts on the loose. This is also one of the few times Doctor Who uses a jump scare for scariness, but it hardly ever happens in the show, so I don't mind it. The ghosts don't have much to do, but they're still hella scary. The scene of Lun being surrounded by them all before they all form a line on either side of him is super creepy. They can't kill him, but they plan to trap him, and it's almost like they're trying to be nonchalant here, to seem like they aren't planning anything. I've also got to mention the scene with Cass. God, this is so nerve-wracking. Watching Spooky Moran dragging the axe before it cuts to what Cass is hearing, and it's just silence, as she's too scared to turn around. The imagery here is so surreal. Back with the Doctor, he's about to confront the Fisher King. I love this scene. The Fisher King is really intimidating, the way he's shrouded in darkness. That on top of how the Doctor is clearly scared of him. The way the Fisher King looms over him as he mocks the Doctor for preferring to die rather than change the future. But then, the Doctor activates his trap guard. He's been playing 4-dimensional chess with the Fisher King the entire time, and tricks him, telling him the words that infected everyone are gone. This is all a cunning ruse though, as the Doctor uses one of the power cells from the ship as a bomb to blow up the dam protecting the town, creating the flooded wasteland we saw in the future, and killing the Fisher King in the process. But hang on a second, if the Fisher King is dead, who's in the chamber? It's the Doctor, it's obviously the Doctor. The episode pretty much ends here. The ghosts are trapped. Bennett encourages Lund to confess his love to Cass because he didn't do the same with O'Donnell when he had the chance. But then, we're given one final mindfuck as the bootstrap paradox is brought back. The Doctor only got his ghost projection to say what it had said because he'd already seen it saying those things. So, where did those ideas come from? The whole story is in its own infinitely repeating time loop, and it just adds one last layer to this cake of brilliance. I am so good at metaphors. Under the Lake and Before the Flood are two brilliant episodes. They've got a great mystery with a plot that keeps you guessing. They've got some really creepy visuals. They add a lot to the Doctor and Clara's arcs over the series. I just adore this story. I'm going to tell you at the end of this video to give the entire Capaldi era another go, but even if you're already a fan of the era but never thought much of this two-parter, I highly encourage you to give it another go. It's got a lot going for it, and like I said earlier, I honestly consider it about on par with the Library two-parter. The Girl Who Died is an episode that exists. Okay, I don't really have much to say about most of this episode. I mean, it's a pretty fun, light-hearted adventure for the most part. There was clearly a lot of Monty Python inspiration, and the episode doesn't take itself too seriously, and I respect that. Until the ending. The Doctor and the Vikings defeat the Maya by threatening to leak their DMs on space Twitter or something, and they leave. And so the Vikings win, but at a cost. They lost Ashilda in the process, a young girl who meant a lot to everyone in the village. Now would probably be the time to make a Game of Thrones joke, but I have not seen the show, and at this point I refuse purely out of spite. This death really gets to the Doctor. He's just spent the last day doing everything he can to ensure the Vikings survive the attack. For a moment, it felt like one of those few times where everybody lives. But no, the Doctor's actions have inadvertently killed someone once again. The Doctor gives this speech to Clara about how he always runs away from the guilt and the shame, and it really hits hard. But then, he realizes why he has this face. The Doctor has spent most of this incarnation wondering who he is now, and wondered at the start why he chose this face. And he remembers. It's the same face as Caecilius, certified marble man from the fires of Pompeii. In that episode, the Doctor succumbed to his own guilt, abandoning Pompeii after being the one to doom it. But Donna begged him to just save someone, and he did. He saved Caecilius and his family. This reminds the Doctor of who he is and what he does. He'll always do everything he can to help and save people, and in a rush of emotion and anger and hope, he saves Ashilda. He adapts Maya technology and essentially makes her immortal. Once again, in an act of power, the Doctor tries to break the rules and cheat death. It seems like a great move on the surface, but is another sign of the dark path the Doctor is going down, and the lack of consideration for the long-term effects it will have on others. The Doctor isn't sure if he actually made the right decision, as he knows how much of a curse immortality can be, and we see the effects of his actions in the woman who lived. Centuries have passed, and Ashilda now calls herself Me, as she's lived so many different lives in so many different places. With all the people she knew dying, she feels like those versions of herself died with them. She's lost everyone she ever cared about, but her mind can't retain all those memories, and now she doesn't remember any of the grief she suffered, relying on her diary as reminders of what caused her pain in the past. She's like the midway point between Plastic Rory and Captain Jack in terms of immortality. She's not as fragile as Plastic Rory was, but still isn't functionally immortal, just artificially programmed to never age. Jack's immortality works differently to Me's. He was brought back by godlike powers, specifically created to never die, and so his body is also augmented. He can also heal any injuries, and can seemingly remember all of his past in the way no ordinary human could. Me doesn't have this luxury. She wasn't designed to be immortal by a god, she's just an ordinary human with basically a frozen age. This is one of the few times where the Doctor is forced to see the world he's left behind. He always just does what he assumes is the right thing, then leaves before any consequences show themselves. Me survived, but at what cost? It seems like she's lost a lot of her humanity and empathy. She feels as if she can't form attachments. Quick side note, but something I find kinda strange in this episode is the Doctor's insistence on calling her a Shilda instead of me. I know calling her me would make things a bit confusing. It just seems strange for the Doctor to insist on essentially dead-naming someone. Honestly, I think this episode is just kinda okay, but it perfectly shows the effects that the Doctor's power tripping has on the world around him. And you bet he isn't learning from this experience. But that's a story for a few minutes from now. The next two episodes are the Zygon Invasion and the Zygon Inversion. Daniel and the Cooler Daniel. This is another episode where the Doctor has to confront the world he leaves behind. In the 50th anniversary, Day of the Doctor, the three Doctors team up and stop a Zygon invasion. The Zygons are trying to invade Earth and make it their new home, after their home planet of Zygor was destroyed in the Time War. The Doctors wipe the memories of all the Zygons orchestrating the attack, and a peace treaty is organized. There are still 20 million Zygons needing somewhere to live, and so they're allowed to live on Earth in peace, as refugees. This episode takes place a couple of years later, as the ceasefire is breaking down, due to Zygon extremists wanting to radicalize the human race and their own kind, to kickstart a war. But the vast majority of Zygons just want to live in peace. This is a very political episode, and one that really hasn't aged since it aired. This story is the show's commentary on the refugee crisis, and encourages the characters and the audience to take their prejudice towards migrants and refugees into consideration, showing how every group is capable of the best and worst of humanity, and how the radicalists of every group don't represent the majority. Doctor Who had dealt with similar topics before, like in The Claws of Axos, which basically predicted Brexit, or Turn Left, which predicted the UK. The ceasefire and peace between humans and Zygons is represented by the two Osgoods. Osgood is Unit's scientific advisor who got impostered in Day of the Doctor. But then, one of the Osgoods was popped by Missy in Death in Heaven, which could have been the main thing that kicked off this revolution. I like that we never find out whether it was the human or Zygon Osgood that died, because it doesn't matter. They were both Osgood, and they both deserved the right to live. This scene in particular stands out to me. The Zygons have shapeshifted into the family of this soldier. Their plan was to kill all the renegade Zygons in this town, but the soldier can't bring himself to do it. It's easy to comment on his stupidity here, walking into an obvious trap, but if it was you in this situation, could you kill the Zygons? Like, yeah, they're aliens pretending to be his family, but it'd still be him executing his family. It also highlights the double standards of the people happy to target and bomb third world countries and hotspots for refugees. They're happy to kill, as long as there's no faces attached. The Zygon extremists are focused on creating a climate of fear, forcing Zygons to be unmasked and their true forms revealed to cause panic. Also, uploading videos to nondescript online video platform, which go viral and end up on national news. They're creating artificial panic and hostility, and indulging in the chaos that's about to ensue. I also really like Clara's scenes in the Zygon Inversion. She's been trapped by the Zygons and is in a weird sort of dream. Pretty much all of these shots are filmed at an angle, and so many things are off, like the toothpaste or the newspaper being filled with gibberish. Everything just feels so strange, and it creates a great uneasy feeling. We also see how independent and strong Clara has become, as she can subconsciously control her Zygon clone's actions in small ways, like being able to delay the bazooka destroying the Doctor's plane, or sending a text to the Doctor from Bonnie's phone. The scene where Clara and Bonnie are talking is also brilliant. How Clara constantly tries to outsmart Bonnie or trick her by giving vague but still not false answers. It's honestly easy to forget that this scene is essentially Jenna Coleman talking to herself, because she plays both roles so well. And then there's this scene. Oh my god, this scene. The Doctor de-escalates the tension by getting everyone to just talk. The leaders of both sides are ready to start their war, both desperate to protect their own people by any means necessary, no matter how many of their own people they indirectly slaughter with the horrors of war. And the Doctor puts things into perspective. He gets Bonnie to actually think about what her long-term plan is, as she's too infatuated with the short-term prospects of war. And my god, the whole thing is incredible. I really wish I could just play this whole scene. There's not even any music until the end of the scene. You've just got Peter Capaldi acting his heart out, and it's beautiful. You can feel the pain of the Doctor in this scene, how he's forced to confront and relive his own actions during the Time War, and how he vowed to never let anyone else feel the pain he feels. And he succeeds. He changes Bonnie's mind, and it feels earned. This is a perfect ending to this story. There's no actual war, there's no fighting, there's no death. There's just talking, resolution, forgiveness. Everything the Doctor should stand for, and this episode handles it masterfully. There's a reason this scene in particular is so highly regarded, and why it's one of those scenes that gets posted on r/Doctor Who all the time. I really like the Zygon two-parter. It feels like a mature and engaging commentary on an issue that never seems to go away. It handles all its aspects incredibly well, it's engaging. I also like how there are multiple settings all across the world. It adds a level of freshness compared to the majority of episodes being bound to the UK. And then it all culminates in that phenomenal ending. An incredibly strong start to the second half of Series 9. I wonder how they're gonna top it. Oh, fuck off. Okay, it's time. The Series 9 finale. Possibly the most polarizing thing in New Who. Well, this 3-part finale begins with Face the Raven. This episode gets kinda overshadowed by nothing in particular, but I genuinely consider it a top-tier episode in its own right. This episode is what Clara's arc has been building up to, and it's this episode's job to conclude it, while setting up the narrative for this big character piece of a finale. We've already seen how overconfident Clara is becoming, and this cold open shows just how bad things are getting. We begin with the Doctor and Clara entering the TARDIS, having just finished an off-screen adventure, and judging by the way they're talking, they barely escaped with their lives. Clara is bragging about how she saved the Doctor's life.
The second most beautiful garden in all of time and space, and we can never come back here because you, Miss Oswald, decided to...
And this line from the Doctor implies that whatever happened to put them in a life-threatening situation was Clara's fault. It reminds me of this throwaway line from Under the Lake.
Is this something she said? She does that. She wants an argument with Gandhi!
Once again, it's played as a joke, but it's clear that traveling with the Doctor has given Clara a toxic, self-righteous attitude. Or at the very least, exacerbated the toxic self-righteous attitude that she already had. Then, the TARDIS phone rings. It's Rigsy, one of the community service guys from Flatline. Clara gave him the phone number for the TARDIS, without the Doctor knowing or consenting. She no longer considers the Doctor to be one of her hobbies or someone above her. She considers these adventures her entire life, and that she and the Doctor are basically equal at this point. So, Rigsy has a tattoo of a number that's counting down, and no memory of what happened yesterday. They determine he met aliens on a hidden street in the centre of London, and they go scouting. Clara dangles out of the TARDIS, nearly dying, but sees no issue. I do like how they brought back Rigsy for this episode, seeing as he was there just as Clara was properly beginning her current arc of trying to be like the Doctor. It's a slightly subtle way of putting things into perspective, reminding you of how much she's truly changed since then. So, they find the hidden street, which is actually a refugee camp for aliens. There are all these species wanting somewhere to live, and this is where they go. There are even comparisons made to the Zygons. The Zygons don't need this place to take refuge. They can already shapeshift to appear human and live a normal life. But none of the aliens here have that ability, and unless those lurkworms are placed everywhere on Earth to change how they're all perceived, that isn't gonna change. The Trap Street is such a nice twist on the Doctor Who formula. A large percentage of episodes are set in modern-day London, and this episode is too, but in a completely different way. Rather than your standard alien invasion, you've got all these aliens living in peace in a street that looks centuries old. The fact that it's in the centre of London puts a great twist on the standard modern-day Earth setting. Then we see how the peace is kept between all these typically hostile aliens. The Raven. The street abides by very strict no-tolerance rules, as any deviation will result in the countdown to the Raven killing them. I love this concept, the way the Raven forms into a black cloud like an omen of death. Ravens have been a significant part of mythology for many years. In Celtic mythology, the Black Raven is a sign of death, and in Roman mythology, black ravens are associated with Janus, a god who had two faces, one looking into the future and one looking into the past, which is exactly what the Janus species in this episode does. Two of this species are living on this street, and one of them was the one allegedly murdered by Rigsy. Clara finds out that the chronolock/death sentence can be passed on to another person with consent, and she begins to formulate a plan. Me has guaranteed Clara's protection and safety while she's on the street, and she deduces that if Rigsy passes the chronolock to her, she'll be safe. Me is in full control of the chronolock and can remove it at any time, so Clara taking it will buy them more time to find out who actually killed Anna. Good plan. Right? Yeah, you see, Clara made the fatal mistake of not knowing that this whole thing was orchestrated by me to trap the Doctor. Pfft, idiot. And finally, it happens. Clara takes a risk, and it doesn't pay off. She took a risk much like something the Doctor would do, but she made the fatal error of not being practically immortal. Pfft, idiot. Clara tried too hard to be like the Doctor, and now she's paying the price. And she accepts this. She always knew she was just the latest in a long line of companions, and knew her time would come to an end someday. But the Doctor isn't as willing to let her go. He completely snaps, telling me to fix it and save Clara. This is one of those rare moments where the Doctor's dark side truly shows. Just how impulsive and emotional he can be when he's got nothing to lose. It's also a great continuation of how he's been toying with his power throughout this series. He even threatens to bring the Zygons to wage war on this street, basically completely ending the peace he tried so hard to keep just 2 episodes prior. And we saw how much that meant to him, which really puts into perspective just how impulsive he's being here, and how much Clara means to him. This is the Doctor at his darkest, and he's worse than Bonnie. Worse than Missy.
The Doctor is no longer here, you are stuck with me!
But Clara, ironically enough, is the one to bring him back down to Earth. She accepts that she went too far, and that nothing can be done. When Danny died, she completely snapped and tried to get the Doctor to change history. And she did the same thing in Before the Flood when she thought the Doctor was going to die. But here, she doesn't try to bargain, she doesn't demand that things be changed. She accepts her fate, which I think shows a bit of underlying selfishness, but at the same time seems selfless. It's selfish because she can't accept the idea of others in her life dying, but when it's herself dying, she doesn't put up a fight. But at the same time, the fact that she doesn't protest and try to convince the Doctor to change things is pretty selfless. So, some third party is behind all of this, getting me to trap the Doctor to take him somewhere. Granted, Clara dying was not part of the plan, but surely that won't have any repercussions later on, right? So, the Doctor gets teleported away, and the first part of the finale ends. I love Face the Raven. It feels like a fresh concept for the show, putting a spin on familiar elephants. Elephants? Putting a spin on familiar elements. This episode kinda gets lost in the Series 9 shuffle, stuck in between Please God, the Pain, Make It Stop, and underrated. But I think it holds up very well on its own, almost on the level of what comes next. Speaking of which, Heaven Sent, the penultimate episode of Series 9. Widely regarded as Doctor Who's magnum opus, its underrated masterpiece. Now, before we begin, I've gotta be completely honest. In the past, I've made some jokes about Heaven Sent that have led people to believe I genuinely dislike the episode. And it's about time I come out with the truth. This is me addressing the alligators. I am breaking my silence. This is my truth. I was being ironic. What, did you think I was fucking stupid? This is in my top 3 episodes of all time, easy. Yeah, like every other individual with 300 IQ, I adore this episode, and will try my best to do it justice right here, as we tackle Doctor Who's masterpiece. We begin with various shots of what seems to be some kind of castle, some of the shots almost seeming like a POV, as we make our way to a room with a strange contraption, contrasting with the medieval design of the location we've just been given a brief tour of. As all this is happening, we're treated to a voiceover from the Doctor. He tells a story of sorts, about how something is born at the same time as you, and as you live your life, it journeys towards you, slowly, but never stopping. Then one day, it catches up with you, and your life is over. An almost personification of death, the monologue reflecting on how you should live your life while you can, as you never know when it's over. You could also draw comparisons here to the Raven from the previous episode, a manifestation of death that always comes for you at the exact moment it's meant to, never stopping. As the speech comes to an end, we see a mysterious hand pull a lever, as the owner of said hand gasps in pain, dropping to the floor, their hand dissolving into dust. The machine activates, and after a few seconds, the Doctor teleports in. This is where he was sent at the end of Face the Raven. He steps out, and we're reminded of Clara's death, which was just moments ago for him. He notices the dust on the floor, and recognizes it as the remains of a dead person, as though whoever put him here is mocking him. He makes a chilling assertion to whoever is behind all of this.
I am the Doctor. I'm coming to find you, and I will never, ever stop.
During the opening titles, Peter's name is the only one that shows up, proving that there will be no companion this time around. The Doctor is on his own, left to face whatever this place is, and whoever put him here, alone. The Doctor walks around, looks outside, and takes in his surroundings. He's in some sort of castle with multiple stories, and no way of knowing how far down it goes, or whatever may lie at the bottom. He beckons whoever is behind this to come out, to show him what they've got, and we discover either the best or worst thing imaginable. He isn't alone here. Something else is here, and it's watching him. Everything this thing sees is displayed on the monitors around the castle, so whatever it is, it wants the Doctor to know it's there. We get a brief, distant glimpse of what it is. A figure, draped in a white veil, hunched over, as it moves away from view. Soon after, it catches up with him, and he runs away, finding a door at the end of a corridor. He uses a telepathic trick to unlock the door, and says,
"See, Clara."
Then his face drops as he remembers. He opens the door, and there's just a wall. The figure is approaching, and the Doctor can't see any way out. He realizes that this must be it, as we get a proper look at the veiled figure. The veil is old and tattered, and we can't see what's underneath. All we see are 2 rotting hands reaching out to him, the veil surrounded by flies. The Doctor makes a confession, and the veil stops. Everything stands still, the Doctor left in confusion. Suddenly, the castle rumbles as the walls and corridors begin rearranging themselves, and the wall behind him opens up. The Doctor enters what appears to be a bedroom. He looks around and notices a framed portrait of Clara on the wall, directly in the eyeline of the bed. Whoever put him here doesn't want him to rest. If he does, he'll be staring face to face with the friend he lost. But something is off about the portrait. It's old. It's torn. It's beginning to crack and fall apart. How long has this picture been around? How long could this whole thing have been organized for? The Doctor is so preoccupied with this mystery, he doesn't notice the monitor behind him, showing the veil creeping up on him once again. It's only when he notices a fly on the portrait that he realizes, providing a lesson to the Doctor and the audience to always listen and look out for flies. Doctor Who is no stranger to making us fear the ordinary, and now the sound of a fly buzzing its wings, something so mundane and irritating, is now a sign of death. The Doctor also tells us the story of the veil, how it's based on an old woman who died, and the image became his biggest childhood fear. He deduces that this whole place is a torture chamber, made solely for him to gain information. He then throws a stool at a window, smashing it, and then jumps out into the uncertain misty depths below. The next thing we know, he's back in his TARDIS. We assume this is after he's escaped the castle, but then it's revealed that he's still falling. All this is taking place inside his mind. This is the Doctor's storeroom, akin to Sherlock's mind palace. It's here that he reveals what his plan was. Dropping things on the floor was his way of testing the mavity in this place, and by smelling salt in the air, he concluded that there must be water at the bottom of the castle. Throwing the chair out of the window was also his way of finding out roughly how far down the water is. It was his best shot of survival. We see just how much thought and calculation went into this whole process. He hits the water, and everything goes black. The Doctor slowly regains consciousness, as he starts questioning his situation through the pretense of Clara asking him questions. Clara isn't saying anything, and we don't even see her face. The memory of her death and the rawness of the pain is still too much for the Doctor to confront head on. She remains a distant reminder for the time being. The Doctor wakes up and discovers that the bottom of the water is completely covered in countless skulls. But he survived, and has some time to gather more information before the veil catches up to him. He finds some new clothes, a velvet suit, which he wears, as his current clothes are kinda drenched. I'd say the velvet clothes are my favourite 12th Doctor look. Velvet being associated with nobility, it represents where this Doctor is headed as he adjusts to this new reality, ready to be noble, to show his strength and stoicism amidst all the castle throws at him. The Doctor notices a patch of soil and asks Clara what she'd do. Clara says she'd do the same thing he would, and he remarks that that attitude was what killed her. This is all going on in the Doctor's mind, and this is him finally taking accountability for how he didn't do enough to control Clara's overconfidence, and how it cost them both in the end. The Doctor digs up the soil as the lighting changes before our eyes, serving as a time-lapse to show how long he was digging. Did I mention how good the directing is in this episode yet? 'Cause, yeah, it's really good. The Doctor gets FNAF jump-scared by the veil, and realizes that the only way to save himself is to confess. To admit truths he's never admitted before. And we get a follow-up to Davros's question in The Witch's Familiar. Why did he run away from Gallifrey? Davros knew it wasn't out of boredom, and presumed the Doctor was scared of the hybrid prophecy, and his part in its becoming. The Doctor does admit that he was scared, but what of? Well, apparently, that confession alone was enough, so he gets to keep that information for the time being, as the castle walls twist and reshape once more, as the Doctor comes closer to Room 12, and whatever it holds. We then get a proper delve into one of the episode's main aspects, the exploration of grief. We get another voiceover from the Doctor about how the day you lose someone isn't as bad as all the days they stay dead. The Doctor sits here, haunted by the stare of Clara, as he ticks off the seconds, not only to time how long it takes for the veil to catch up to him, but also as a representation of the emptiness he feels upon losing the person who mattered most to him, not feeling the motivation to do anything except focus on what he lost. It's a very accurate portrayal of grief and loss, and this aspect adds so much to the nuance and overall messaging of the episode. I think the Doctor running as far as he can from the veil also represents his denial when the reality of death catches up to him. He tries not to think about it or confront those feelings, but when he's not running, it's all he can think about. But then he asks himself the question, how long will he be here? He'll be stuck here as long as he keeps running away from his reality and not giving his confessions. But this also represents the feeling of grief. There's a time, however long, where it feels like you'll never get over your loss. This whole episode is a brilliant metaphor for grief and the struggle of overcoming it. Eventually, the Doctor needs to give one last confession to unlock Room 12. He talks about the hybrid, the ancient Gallifreyan prophecy foreseeing a new warrior, half Time Lord, half Dalek. This is what this torture chamber is for, and the Doctor knows it. It's all been created for whoever is behind it to learn about the hybrid. The Doctor gives as much information as he realistically can, saying he knows what the hybrid is, and that he's afraid. The veil retreats, and Room 12 opens. The Doctor enters the room, shrouded to the point where only his silhouette is visible. The way out is right there, through 20 feet of asbantium, a material 400 times harder than diamond. Literally impossible to break by hand in one lifetime. This is the point where the Doctor should give up. All he needs to do is confess the truth of the hybrid, and he'll be freed. But then, he remembers. He remembers it all. Every time. He lashes out, saying how he could just give up, tell them about the hybrid, rather than face this reality. As the vision of Clara disappears, he laments that no matter what he does, she still won't be alive when he escapes. So, what's the point? But then, finally, he sees Clara. She faces him and finally talks, telling him not to lament. There's no time to lament, no time to grieve. He needs to win. However hard this may seem, however impossible his reality may be, he's capable of getting through it. He never gives up. That's who the Doctor is. He gets up and starts punching the wall, vowing to protect the secret of the hybrid at all costs. And the veil finally catches up with him. He dies, not even making a dent in the wall. End of story. Except not really. Back in his mind palace, the Doctor talks about how Time Lords can take forever to die. Even if they're injured to a point where they can't regenerate, their body still tries, leading them to potentially spend days in agony. This is what happened to the Doctor. The touch of the veil was designed to be just enough to keep him alive, just to make him suffer and kick him while he's down one last time. The Doctor spends the next day and a half in unendurable agony, slowly crawling back to the room where he began, before he dies for good. And we finally realize the truth that's been staring us in the face the whole time. Why was that portrait of Clara so old? Why were there so many skulls? Why would there be other people in a torture chamber tailor-made for the Doctor? There were also visual cues for this, with the brilliant directing, such as this shot of the Doctor's face matching up with the skull in this crossfade. Those skulls, they were all the Doctor. Assuming each Doctor was here for a few days before dying, the Doctor has already died here nearly 1 million times, and there's still so much wall to break down. And then we find out who pulled the lever at the start of the episode. It was the previous Doctor, summoning an earlier version of himself from when he first arrived. So the new Doctor can follow the same path, albeit with a microscopically thinner wall to break down. With one last move, the Doctor connects himself to the teleporter mechanism, draining his life energy and reducing himself to dust so that he can begin anew. God, this episode is magnificent! And thus, the montage begins, as the Doctor lives the same day over and over, dying time after time, with the sole purpose of breaking the impenetrable wall. All the while, reciting part of a story called The Shepherd Boy by the Brothers Grimm. This tale is of a boy who was asked impossible questions by an emperor, like, how many drops of water are there in the ocean? How many stars are in the sky? And how many seconds in eternity? And the boy answered with equally impossible and vague answers. The shepherd's boy, in this case, is the Doctor, finding ways to dodge impossible questions. This whole episode is a masterpiece of television, and this culmination is sheer perfection. And finally, with one last punch, the wall breaks down, and the Doctor is free. The veil breaks down, revealing it to be just a piece of machinery, made of multiple cogs, much like how each Doctor who died was essentially a cog in the endless machine that was his escape from this hell. We find out that the entire torture chamber was within the Doctor's confession dial, bigger on the inside, and we see where he ended up. Gallifrey. The Doctor has finally found it, but he isn't happy. Now he knows who was behind all this, who killed Clara, who subjected him to eons upon eons of torment and death, and now nothing will stop him. Billions of years in a confession dial wasn't enough to stop him. He's back, and he's looking for revenge. Now that he's free, he gives one last confession before he approaches the Time Lords. The truth of the hybrid. He confesses that the prophecy was wrong, that the hybrid is not half Dalek. Instead, the hybrid is him. And thus, the episode comes to an end. Heaven Sent is a masterpiece. There's no other way of putting it. There truly is no episode like Heaven Sent, and I doubt there ever will be again. Everything from the mystery to the themes presented, to the performance, to the directing, to the score, everything is so amazingly executed. This is Doctor Who at its absolute best, an absolutely phenomenal episode that does everything it set out to do near flawlessly. This is plenty of people's favourite episode of all time, and I completely understand why. Personally, I consider it number 2. We'll get to number 1 soon, I promise. So, that's Heaven Sent. Undeniably, Doctor Who's peak. Series 9 concludes with Hellbent, the final resolution to the series as a whole, and where the Doctor has been heading. To say this episode was controversial when it came out would be an understatement. To say the fandom's reaction to this episode arguably ruined the reputation of the Capaldi era for years afterwards would also still be a bit of an understatement. The final part of the finale begins, as Moffat finales tend to, in a completely different location, Nevada, USA. A car or jeep or whatever this, I don't know, car law, pulls up at an American diner in the middle of a vast desert. The Doctor steps out of the passenger side and walks in, guitar in hand. To the audience's surprise, but strangely not to the Doctor's, Clara is serving behind the counter. The pair begin talking, as if they've never met. Given the build-up of the previous 2 episodes, you'd likely expect Hellbent to be filled with action, but in line with the majority of the Capaldi era, it establishes itself as a slow, character-focused narrative with this opener. We cut back to the Doctor on Gallifrey, but he's not heading towards the Citadel. He heads to a barn. The same barn he grew up in. The same barn where he ended the Time War. The same barn where Clara gave him a speech about how it's okay to be afraid. Gallifrey is back, but it's not a time for rejoicing for the Doctor. He has work to do. A common criticism of this episode is that Gallifrey is wasted, but have you watched the show before? Throughout the classic era, Gallifrey was just the place where the Doctor was from. It would appear occasionally, but when it did, there was always a focus on the characters, or the politics that was going on there. It was only in New Who, with the Time War, that Gallifrey became this mythic, all-important land. But in Day of the Doctor, Gallifrey was saved. So it's pretty much gone back to how it was in the classic series. The Doctor is surrounded by Shibogans, the lower-class, less privileged citizens of Gallifrey. The Doctor is a Gallifreyan, born into a more privileged and opportunity-filled life, and yet, here he stands with them, ready to take down the ruling elite of the High Council. They send a ship to try and get the Doctor, but he says nothing, just draws a line in the sand, and steps back. He won't do as they say, not after everything they did to him and Clara. He refuses to speak to a soldier, or even the general. The only person he'll give the time of day is Rassilon, the president, the guy on top. Rassilon offers a handshake, but the Doctor refuses to give him even that basic courtesy, instead dropping his confession dial on the floor, showing Rassilon that he remembers it all, that he knows what they did to him purely so they could learn about the hybrid, and he won't back down. Then finally, after 8 minutes of silence, the Doctor gives a command.
Get off my planet.
Rassilon is very elitist here, believing that the Shibogans in the Drylands don't matter. He believes that everyone is below him, that everyone should follow his commands, and the Doctor's refusal to back down scares him. Eventually, all the soldiers ordered to shoot the Doctor stand by him, as the General repeats the Doctor's earlier command to Rassilon.
Get off his planet.
The Doctor deposed the President of Gallifrey without lifting a finger, and he's just getting started. The visual storytelling in this opening is fantastic. The Doctor doesn't utter a single word until the end. Everything is conveyed purely through his actions and facial expressions, and it adds so much weight. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, and this scene is worth 1,000,000. The Doctor finally properly explains what a confession dial is. Or rather, what it should be. It's an opportunity for a dying Time Lord to face their demons and make their peace before their mind is uploaded to the Matrix. But the Time Lords weaponize this, turning it into a torture chamber for the Doctor, so he would confess the truth of the hybrid. Ahila, the leader of the Sisterhood of Kharn, asks the Doctor if his banishing Rassilon was him being cruel and cowardly. Two things the Doctor vowed never to be. It also harks back to his speech in the Zygon Inversion, where he accused Bonnie of wanting cruelty to beget cruelty. He's so blinded by his own anger, he doesn't realize he's become the very thing he fought so hard against. But, in a twisted way, it's understandable. Given everything he's been through, it's no wonder he forgets his moral code in the moment. But there's still one more question. What is the hybrid? I mean, we know it's a mix of two warrior races, but is there anything more to it? And why did the Doctor say the hybrid was me? Well, we finally get an answer to some of those questions. It was prophesied that the hybrid would stand over the ruins of Gallifrey and unravel the web of time, breaking 1 billion hearts to heal its own. The General and the Sisterhood want the Doctor to protect them from this prophecy, because he's the only one who knows what the hybrid is. They trust him, and he abuses this trust and rescues Clara from the moment of her death. The effects of this scene are really cool. The way you can hear time splinter as it freezes, and the almost 3D chromatic aberration makes everything feel otherworldly. The General explains that Clara has been extracted from her time stream temporarily, so the Time Lords can gain information she supposedly has on the hybrid. After which, she'll be returned to her moment of death. But the Doctor won't allow it. He's waited this long to save Clara, broke down an unbreakable wall and died billions of times just for the tiniest chance he could see her again. And he isn't letting this opportunity slip away without a fight. The Doctor shoots the General and escapes to the most dangerous place on Gallifrey, the Cloisters. The Cloisters are a hidden area beneath the Citadel, containing the entry to the Matrix, guarded by the ghosts of dead Time Lords. You can see what happens when people try and break into the Cloisters to access the Matrix, as we see Daleks, Cybermen, and Weeping Angels chained up and forced to become part of the database. It's a really weird and unsettling visual, seeing a Dalek completely helpless and begging for the release of death. Clara asks the Doctor where his velvet coat went, and asks what happened to the Doctor. The loss of his velvet coat shows the loss of his nobility, as he devolves into pure power-hungry madness. He's completely overthrown the High Council, ergo standing over the ruins of what Gallifrey once was. He also rescued Clara from her death, and refuses to let her go back, not caring about the damage it could cause, ergo unraveling the web of time. Sound familiar? Then, the Doctor admits he lied. He doesn't actually know what the hybrid is. He lied so he could escape the confession dial, and so he could save Clara. Ahila tells Clara he was trapped in the dial for 4.5 billion years. Once again, if we do some estimating, 4.5 billion years is over 1.5 trillion days. Assuming every Doctor lived for a few days each, the Doctor likely died over 500 billion times in that dial. And he remembers every single life. All of it, just to save Clara. But when Clara asks him why he did that, when she was already dead, he struggles to give a definitive answer.
I was dead and gone. Why? Why would you even do that to yourself?
I had a duty of care.
Because it doesn't matter how close you are with someone, you don't put yourself through 500 billion deaths for that vague a reason. The truth is that the Doctor can't let Clara go. She means too much to him, and pushing through and breaking out was the only way he could heal his own heart, as he continues to run from the fact that Clara's death could have been prevented had he put his foot down once in a while and stopped her from growing too overconfident. The Doctor steals a TARDIS, and he and Clara run away. The Doctor tells Clara that now she'll be free of Gallifrey's extraction chamber and properly alive again. But nothing has changed. No matter how confident the Doctor appears here, deep down, he knew it wouldn't work, but he's still drowning in denial. Just before they left, Ahila said,
"All you're doing is giving her hope,"
showing that no matter what, he knew, hence why he lashes out when Clara questions him. They travel to the end of the universe, and just like in Listen, I like how the Doctor acknowledges that it's 4 Nox. Of course, it's a reference to the end of time, but the prophecy there was that 4 Nox would be the sign of the Doctor's death. And here it is again. At the end of the universe, where Gallifrey once stood, the Doctor finds me. And we get the truth. The truth about the hybrid. The common theory was that the hybrid was half Time Lord, half Dalek. But that was never part of the original prophecy. Me offers her own theory. What if the hybrid was half Time Lord, half human? No, not that one. No, not that one either, Jesus Christ. What if the hybrid was the Doctor and Clara? We've seen their relationship develop over the last 2 series. How they both became incredibly toxic, pushing each other to the limit, becoming almost indistinguishable from one another. And now, the Doctor has done everything the hybrid was prophesied to do. He broke time, stood over the ruins of Gallifrey, willing to fracture time and the universe, ergo breaking a billion hearts to heal his own. Because he can't accept the possibility of losing Clara. They're both too reliant on each other, and just can't give each other up. What if Missy put the Doctor and Clara together because she saw the prophecy unfolding this way? She already said she put them together because they were the perfect pairing, pushing each other too far all the time. Missy relished in the idea of the Doctor bringing chaos and destruction, just like her. What if the Doctor ran away from Gallifrey because he was scared of himself? The prophecy of the hybrids was a destiny trap for both the Doctor and the Time Lords. The Time Lords were concerned about the prophecy of the hybrid, despite it being billions of years away. However, by trapping the Doctor for billions of years to learn about the hybrid, they caused the prophecy to finally unfold. And likewise, the Doctor ran away because he was scared to confront the reality that he would become the hybrid, which resulted in him becoming the hybrid. The Doctor knows he went too far. It's all everyone's been saying to him all episode. But he understands now. He decides to wipe Clara's memory of him, to protect her. But Clara doesn't want that. She made the choice to go out on her own terms. She couldn't imagine any other life without the Doctor, and would rather die than live an ordinary life. She even rigged the neural block to affect the Doctor when he tries to use it on her, showing how she really is too much like him. Too cold and calculating, and too selfish. The Doctor tells her that she didn't even rig the device to affect him instead. So they agree to use it together, with a 50-50 chance of one of them losing their memories. This is the only way to kill the hybrid. One of them has to forget the other, and the Doctor is the one to forget. I like to think he was lying when he said Clara didn't rig the device, and knew it would be him who forgets. The Doctor knows he wouldn't be able to properly let go of Clara, and after going through denial, anger, bargaining, and depression, he reaches the final stage of grief. Acceptance. He took things too far, and now he's paying the price. But he's okay with it. The Doctor has been incredibly out of character throughout this episode, and that's the point. Everyone has been telling him so. This whole episode has basically been what would have happened if the Doctor wasn't given a reality check at the end of the Waters of Mars. And thus, the Doctor forgets Clara, and their friendship comes to an end. And then, as the episode comes to a close, we find out the context for the Doctor and Clara talking in the diner. Clara is pretending not to know him, and the Doctor is telling her about herself. It's quite tragic in a way, Clara seeing firsthand that the Doctor still remembers how much she meant to him, but is unable to remember anything about her. Clara even tries dropping hints to him, seeing if there's any hope of him remembering her, but gets completely shut down. She's standing right there, and he can't see her. Sound familiar? There's also a reference to how this is the same diner from The Impossible Astronaut. In that episode, and that scene in particular, the Doctor had just died, but came back younger and rejuvenated. A lot like the Doctor in this scene. That part of him, the part that knew Clara, is dead, and he's essentially back to how he was before they travelled together. Then it turns out the diner is the same TARDIS the Doctor and Clara stole, and Clara and me agree to go back to Gallifrey. But they can afford a bit of travelling in the meantime. I won't deny that this is probably the most mishandled part of the episode, but it's not that bad. Clara will still go back to Gallifrey eventually, and her death will still happen as we saw in Face the Raven. Nothing has actually changed about her death. There's just more life than you were expecting. The Doctor goes back to his TARDIS, as it activates and lights up for the first time in a while. The Doctor puts his velvet coat back on, and gets a new sonic screwdriver. The TARDIS takes off, the image of Clara on the door dissolving as it dematerializes. All of this showing how the Doctor is well and truly back. The previous era coming to an end, as we enter a new one. I've never understood why Hellbent was so despised by the fandom. Watching it again, specifically for this video, I love it. While I don't think it's as good as Face the Raven or Heaven Sent, I think it serves as a brilliant conclusion to the Doctor and Clara's story. It's incredibly impactful, without being action-packed, and continues the trend of this era and its brilliant character pieces. I think a lot of the sheer hatred for this episode simply comes from people not properly understanding the Doctor and Clara's arcs, or the storyline being presented. So yes, If you're someone who doesn't like Hellbent, you are in fact suffering from a skill issue. And thus, Series 9 ends. Well, not quite. There are a couple of Christmas specials, serving as epilogues and bridges into the next series. First, there's the frankly brilliant The Husbands of River Song, where the Doctor meets River again, but she doesn't recognize him. The episode as a whole is just a fun Christmas special. There's not much to deeply analyze, I just enjoy it. The final 20 minutes are something else though. River's speech about how magical yet painful it is to be in love with the Doctor, only to realize he was there the whole time. I love it. Then, the spaceship they're on crashes into the planet Beryllium. It's said that that's where the Doctor and River will spend their last time together, and we see how the events of the Series 9 finale have changed the Doctor. Rather than avoiding it, he embraces and accepts that this is the end of their time together, instead choosing to provide the funds for a luxurious restaurant, so they can at least spend their final night together in a nice place. It kind of reminds me of the Doctor's death in Series 6. He invites his friends with him because, even though he had to die, he didn't have to die alone. It's a similar thing here. He might be spending his last night with River, but who's to say it can't be a last night of luxury? It's an incredible conclusion to the Doctor and River's story. It's beautiful, and it's sad. It's both. Something the Doctor has learned to understand. I love this episode. And then there was the return of Dr. Mysterio a year later, which is fine.
Bit empty, isn't it?
Yes, I created a distraction. I flooded downstairs with Pokemon.
I love Series 9. It feels like such a natural and engaging development from Series 8. The Doctor's character sees a massive improvement, becoming less abrasive, only to go full God mode in the finale. Something which had been building up throughout the series. But he overcomes it, and develops as a person. This is a Doctor who's always willing to learn from his mistakes. Clara's arc is also great, how she becomes way more toxic and overconfident, forgetting she had any other life without the Doctor. The stories are mostly really good, and I think the arcs and themes presented in this series go seriously unappreciated. It's truly a magnificent series with so much emotional value, and has some of the best Who you can find. So yeah, Series 9 is a criminally slept on series, and one I highly encourage you to give a second chance with all the context I've given here. Alright, now it's time for Series 10. Probably my favourite series of the entire show. I just adore this whole series. It feels like such quintessential Doctor Who. For context, the Doctor seems to have semi-retired, spending decades lecturing at a university, while guarding a mysterious vault hidden under the building. He's accompanied by Nardole, played by Matt Lucas, who was supposed to be a one-off character, River Song's assistant, but Matt Lucas asked if he could stay on, and it was agreed. And I'm so glad it was. Nardole genuinely adds so much to this series and the dynamic. His chemistry with the Doctor is golden.
I thought I sent you to Birmingham for a packet of crisps.
Yeah, I saw through your cunning ruse.
But the main companion for this series is Bill Potts, played by Pearl Mackie. Bill works in the canteen at the university, but is mesmerized by the Doctor's lectures. She's also lesbian, which of course prompted many people to complain about sexuality being forced down their throats, which had never happened in Doctor Who before. No, stop it. No, well, that's... Stop it! This series was marketed as a fresh start for the show, a jumping on point for new viewers, with the series opener even being called the pilot. It was also confirmed to be Peter Capaldi's final series as the Doctor, with him regenerating at the end of the series. It was also Stephen Moffat's final series as showrunner. He'd been in charge since Series 5 back in 2010, and was moving on, to be replaced by Chibnall Bad. But how does the swan song of these two icons hold up? Well, let's find out, as we enter Doctor Who's absolute peak. So, as I said, Bill likes girls, and I think this shows a lot of maturity and improvement on writer Stephen Moffat's end. He did have a bit of a recurring trope of his characters, mostly female ones, being bisexual to some degree, but the idea of them actually having same-sex relations was only ever brought up for a joke. Personally, I don't think it's super harmful, it's just very much 2000s British sitcom humour. I won't go too much into this whole thing because that's not what this video is about, but this video by the brilliantly named Verily Bitchy delves into this topic far better than I ever could. But here, Bill is just a lesbian. And that's it. It's definitely a massive step in the right direction for Moffat as a writer, and the show. Bill is just great. Like, we stan. Episode 1 immediately establishes who she is and what her relationship will be with the Doctor. She's not some big mystery that the Doctor wants to try and solve. She isn't destined to save the universe. She's just a person. A fun, charismatic person who the Doctor takes a shine to. And when they properly meet and he sees how observant and inquisitive she is, he decides to be her tutor. The Doctor gives off a perfect Mad Professor vibe in this series, and Bill just fits perfectly with the more laid-back vibe Series 10 aims for. Mostly. I think this series is also where the 12th Doctor properly hits his stride. He spent so long questioning who he is, having his personality and actions molded by his toxic relationship with Clara. But after suffering 2 great losses back to back, and seemingly retiring for the most part, he's mellowed. He's learned from his mistakes and come to terms with the fact that things don't last forever, as he says at the end of The Return of Dr. Mysterio.
Everything ends, and it's always sad, but everything begins again too, and that's always happy.
Just like how this series is the quintessential Doctor Who series, I think 12 in this series is the quintessential Doctor. He's got eccentricity, wit, intelligence, and heroism. We'll get to this part. And just as a whole, the Doctor, Bill, and Nardole are my absolute favourite TARDIS team. The whole dynamic is just perfect, and they can easily elevate even the lesser episodes of the series. The pilot is a pretty great introduction episode. With a lot of introduction episodes like this, the plot itself doesn't have to be anything amazing, as the main focus is on introducing new characters and their dynamic with the characters we already know. The pilot kinda reminds me of RTD's series openers, like Smith & Jones and Partners in Crime. The episode focuses on the Doctor and Bill getting to know each other, and seeing Bill's reactions to the universe as they run from a patch of sentient engine oil, which is surprisingly overpowered. Seriously, this thing can travel anywhere in time and space in a matter of seconds, and it can rearrange the atoms of anything and anyone it wants to. It's crazy to me how this thing is potentially one of the most powerful beings in the universe, and that fact is just not given much notice. The next few episodes are all about Bill going on proper adventures with the Doctor, and being excited at all the wonder there is to see, only to discover the dark side of travelling with the Doctor. The death. First, she discovers that the colonists on the first world she visits are some of the last humans, after mass war caused the human race to evacuate the planet. Then, in thin ice, she watches a boy drown under the ice. It really gets to her, and she calls out the Doctor's callous attitude, which also shows us how much the Doctor has changed. In Series 8, he was way more cold and unfeeling when it came to people dying. That side of him is still there, but he's mellowed a lot since, and the events of Hellbent taught him that he can't afford the luxury of outrage. He can't decide who lives and who dies. All he can do is find the best solution, and that means not sitting around grieving all the time. It's a harsh reality, but it's the life he leads. In Into the Dalek and Mummy on the Orient Express, the Doctor was uncaring, and quite harsh in how he responded to the deaths of others. In Before the Flood, he's less rude, but more selfish, prioritizing the safety of Clara over others. And here, he just says it like it is. He can't afford to sit and grieve. He has to move on. And this affects Bill too. She learns that it's important to move on from grudges and focus on doing the right thing. The episode also ends with the Doctor finally atoning for the events of Kill the Moon. Back then, he abandoned Clara and the other characters, leaving them to make a difficult decision alone. It was a cruel and cowardly act on his end, but here, he makes up for it. He has the ability to free the creature trapped underneath the Thames, but He doesn't make the decision himself. He doesn't leave Bill to sort it on her own. He asks her what he should do. He acts on behalf of humanity, not deciding what happens. But he walks our Earth, he breathes our air, and wants to help however he can. This, coupled with the beautiful speech about the value of life, make Thin Ice a perfect showcase of how much the 12th Doctor has changed. After we properly get to see Bill in action for a few episodes, Nodal finally joins the TARDIS team, albeit slightly unwillingly, as his main concern is keeping the Doctor on Earth so he can guard the vault. They travel to a space station, and the Doctor's cockiness comes back to bite him. The Doctor is exposed to the vacuum of space after giving his helmet to Bill, and as a result, he goes blind. He then defeats space capitalism, but is unable to get his eyesight back. The Doctor is permanently blind. This is honestly a brilliant way of spicing up the next few episodes, giving the Doctor a major hindrance. Speaking of the next episode, Extremis is fantastic. The first part to a trilogy, which is a massive contrast from the simple standalone episodes that we've had so far. Basically, there's an ancient text called the Veritas, meaning the truth. Everyone who created the text, everyone who worked on the translations, and everyone who read it killed themselves. The Pope wants the Doctor to read the Veritas. But there's one small problem.
But I cannot see, I'm legally blind.
Meanwhile, Bill is on a date with a girl called Penny.
I'm just not quite used to all of this.
It is absolutely nothing to feel guilty about.
Now, I don't want to speak on behalf of the lesbians, but is this a natural way to talk on a date? Anyway, then the Pope spawns in, and yeah, this part is really funny.
You're all going to hell.
Also, fun fact, the Pope in this episode is played by the same guy who played Rocco in Turn Left. So I've decided that due to the Titanic not crashing, Rocco went from owning a newsagent to becoming the Pope in the span of a decade. This is canon, and you will not change my mind. Eventually, the Doctor briefly gains his eyesight back, so he can read the Veritas, but is interrupted when he sees the people behind all of this. The monks. I love the design of these things, how they look like rotting corpses. We don't even get a proper look at them at first, as we see things through the Doctor's eyes, his vision warped as it slowly comes back. Meanwhile, Bill and Nodal find the two streams of... the projectors, all teleporting them to random places in the world. They go through one and end up in CERN, the European Organization for Nuclear Research. Everyone there has read the Veritas too, and are planning on blowing up the whole building, with themselves in it. They then do the shadow test, where they say random numbers, and if everyone says the same numbers as each other, it's proof they're living in a simulation. Bill and Nodal take the shadow test, and they say the exact same numbers. Everyone does. This is such a brilliantly creepy scene. And then, we realize the truth. This entire world, this entire episode, has taken place in a simulation. The monks have created an entire fake world to learn all about us, to test the best ways to conquer the Earth. At this point, this Doctor knows he isn't real. His only purpose is to give the monks information on the best ways to deal with him when they actually invade. It would make the most sense for him to give up, but he doesn't. He uses the monks' strength against them, noting how their simulation is too realistic, meaning he's able to send all the recordings and data from his sonic sunglasses to his real self. In one last act of heroism, the Doctor sends himself all the information he gathered. This Doctor will die at the hands of the monks, but he doesn't care. Just like in Heaven Sent, he does what he can to make things a little easier for the next one. So now, the non-simulation Doctor knows what's coming, but isn't sure how he's gonna deal with the incoming threat. These beings have run multiple simulations. They know the absolute best, indomitable way to conquer the Earth, and he can't even see them. This isn't the typical alien threat where they rush in with a vague plan, still capable of making mistakes. The monks have done that already. They've learned from any mistakes they made in previous simulations. It's also in this episode we learn that it's Missy in the vault. Throughout this episode, we get interspersed with the build-up to her being put in the vault. We see a mysterious organization that carries out executions for every species they can, and they sentenced Missy to death. Her body would then be stored in the vault for 1,000 years, guarded by the Doctor, who is also the one to perform the execution. He's interrupted by Nardole, who reads an extract from Riversong's diary, which I guess he picked up from the library, about the value and virtue of doing good. How actions of goodness should only be done out of ingenuity, with no hope of any gain, and with no ulterior motive. Not only is this quite subtle foreshadowing for the finale, but it represents Missy and the beginning of her arc in this series. She begs the Doctor to let her live, promising she'll turn good, but the legitimacy of this claim is brought into question. Does she mean this? Or does she just want to stay alive? But then, she says,
I am your friend.
And this is different. It makes no real difference whether she says this or not, but she insists she's being genuine. And so, the Doctor takes a chance.
I swore an oath I'd look after her body for 1,000 years. Nobody mentioned dead.
No matter what, he couldn't bring himself to kill his oldest friend. And now, he's been presented with the idea of Missy changing, and he'll do anything to make that happen. Extremis is easily in my top 10 episodes of all time. It's perfectly creepy, filled with existential dread, mixed in with some great comedy that works well without detracting from the rest of the episode. Overall, a great example of Stephen Moffat at his best. The second part of the Monk trilogy is The Pyramid at the End of the World, an episode which I think goes incredibly underappreciated. I honestly think this episode is about on par with Extremis. One thing I love about this episode, the name of which I refuse to say more than once, is how subtle it tends to be. Very rarely is anything just spelled out to you. You're left to pay attention and focus on the visuals. Like in the beginning, the Doctor is giving a monologue about the end of the world being 1,000,000 tiny moments, while we get a seemingly irrelevant scene of some random woman's glasses being accidentally smashed. The monks arrive in a big pyramid, at the intersection between the three biggest armies on Earth. A pyramid represents a connection between Earth and the spiritual realm, showing how the monks are trying to present themselves as otherworldly beings, landing in the most likely place for war with the promise of preventing it. But this is all a diversion. While the actual end of the world is happening in a lab in Yorkshire. This lab is doing research on various bacterium. The bacterium is being dosed into plants, but the dosage needs to be just right, as the incorrect amount could cause it to become deadly. So anyway, the bacterium becomes deadly. This is what the end of the world comes down to. Not mass war, not climate change, not eggs or beef. A misplaced decimal point. Like the Doctor said, the end of the world is 1,000,000 tiny moments, and it's impossible to chalk it up to one specific event. It's like World War I. It's very easy to say the main catalyst for World War I was the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, but there were many other events that contributed to the rising tensions, such as the European arms race, which occurred throughout the 1900s, or the Russo-Japanese War in 1905. These big, world-changing events are never going to be that simple, and yet they are at the same time. This deadly airborne bacteria came into existence because of mundane events like someone's glasses being smashed, or some guy being smashed. The idea of the world being ended in such a simple way is a great expansion on the themes of existential dread that were presented in Extremis. In that episode, it was, what if the world wasn't real? But here, it's, okay, the world is real, but look how easily it could come to an end. The scary part is that an event like this could happen in real life. In fact, it nearly did. Back in 1990, there was a German company doing research on a bacterium called Rautelia planticola, which I'm sure I just pronounced flawlessly. And a small mistake in this research would mean that all plant life on Earth would be almost completely wiped out. And this is actually the same bacterium used in this episode. Against all odds, the Doctor finds where the world-ending threat is coming from, and manages to put a stop to it by blowing up the lab, sterilizing the bacteria. But he can't get out. The door is locked with a 4-digit code, and the Doctor can't see it. He's gonna save the world, but he'll die in the process. He finally confesses to Bill that he's still blind and can't get out. He came so close to stopping the insurmountable monks who saw every possibility, only to fall at the last hurdle because he couldn't admit he's blind. He didn't want it to become real, but now it has. Bill asks the monks if they can restore the Doctor's sight, offering complete control of the world as long as they give him his eyesight back. All the other leaders consented to the monks taking over, but their consent was impure. It was fueled by fear or strategy. Bill's consent is given out of love for the Doctor. She wants him safe, no matter the cost. Without hope, without witness, without reward. The Doctor gets his sight back just in time to escape the lab, and as he's surrounded by flames, the world falling apart in front of him, the monks give one final chilling line.
Enjoy your sight, Doctor. Now see our world.
Wow. This is honestly a brilliant episode that doesn't get talked about enough. Everything from the pacing, the story, the visuals, it's all on top form. It's a brilliant second part to this trilogy, expanding on the themes of the first part in a different and equally enticing way, and setting up the stakes for the finale incredibly well. This is also easily one of my favourite episodes of all time. It's genuinely just so good. The Lie of the Land is an episode that exists. Okay, this episode isn't bad by any means, but it doesn't hold a candle to what came before it. This isn't even the first time Doctor Who has tried doing 1984, with the result being, could have been better. The Lie of the Land wears its inspirations on its sleeve a lot more compared to The Beast Below, and this showcase of the monks manipulating history, with the Doctor giving a broadcast to the world about how great they are, while not particularly original, is still pretty cool. The scene of Bill and Nardole finally finding the Doctor is... There are elements of what could have been a good scene here. It seems like the Doctor has properly joined the monks. He's not just biding his time, it seems like he's genuinely helping them. Bill makes it clear how much this breaks her, how hard it's been to hold on to the little she had, having faith in the Doctor to save everyone. And Pearl Mackie gives an absolutely killer performance here.
Do you have any idea how hard the past few months have been? It would have been so easy to just give in. I fought against it for you, for when you came back.
Things get so desperate, she takes a gun and shoots the Doctor. He begins regenerating and...
Good girl!
Okay, it was all a ruse. The Doctor hasn't really joined the monks. Wait a minute, there are many problems with this scene. So, the Doctor was pretending to support the monks to test whether Bill was working for them. I mean, sure, but all the soldiers in this room were in on it too. There was a scene earlier where the soldiers do identity checks, but are interrupted by the monks just as they get to Bill and Nardole. It turns out this was a prank, but what would the soldiers have done if the monks hadn't showed up? Were they just hoping a random distraction would occur? Then there's the bit where the Doctor regenerates. So the Doctor can force himself to regenerate at any time and then completely stop it of his own volition. I thought regeneration was irreversible. Bill doesn't even know what regeneration is or looks like, so what was the point? This scene has some brilliant performances from Peter Capaldi and Pearl Mackie, but unfortunately, it comes off as way too self-indulgent. The Doctor and Bill go and ask Missy for advice on how to defeat the monks. She says it like it is. The monks' power comes from a linchpin, the person who allowed them to rule Earth. That person is Bill, and the only way to stop them is for her to die. The Doctor says that Missy suggesting the idea of sacrificing Bill shows she isn't any different, but Missy is showing a desire to change. She says that she could break out of the vault if she wanted to, but doesn't. Since she isn't dead like she was supposed to be, the main reason the Doctor is keeping her here is because he believes her promise that she can change. Plus, she shows desire to help the Doctor defeat the monks. She outright says she wants to change. She has a version of good in her mind, and it's different and less compassionate than the Doctor's, but it's a massive step in the right direction. Anyway, then Bill erases the monks with her mum. Sure, but the main part of this ending that intrigues me is the bonus scene with Missy. She says that she's been reflecting on all the people she's killed. She was able to distract herself with the whole being evil thing, but now, as she's confined and learning to change, the reality of her past is something she's coming to terms with. And it hurts. The Doctor had been talking and sitting in the vault with her for a while, and spending 6 months alone has really allowed that influence to fester. Missy is beginning to show signs of regret for her past actions. I also like how this side of her only shows when she's alone with the Doctor. When Bill was there too, Missy put on an overconfident facade, so Bill didn't get the wrong first impression of her. But the Doctor is someone she trusts. He's been her guide throughout this journey, and he's really beginning to have an effect on her. The Lie of the Land is a mixed bag. I find the scenes with Missy to be the most interesting parts. Everything else, at best, is alright. There are plenty of things, especially in the scenes where Bill and Nordal rescue the Doctor, that just make no sense. And the resolution is fine. But yeah, compared to the 2 brilliant episodes that came before this one, it doesn't quite stick the landing. Things begin developing further for Missy over the next couple of episodes. In Empress of Mars, the TARDIS runs away for unexplained reasons, with Nordal still inside. The only way he can get back is by asking Missy to help him. For the first time in, well, at least 70 years, Missy leaves the vault. The Doctor tells her he'll have to put her straight back into the vault, but this is, once again, a massive step forward for Missy. She had full control of the Doctor's TARDIS. She could have done anything, but she takes it right back to him. Any previous master would have definitely used the TARDIS for evil, but Missy doesn't. But all the same, the Doctor doesn't trust her enough yet to give her free rein. Now, that level of trust would take, I don't know, about another episode to manifest? Yeah, in The Eaters of Light, we find out that the Doctor has been keeping Missy on the TARDIS, getting her to do maintenance. She's locked out of the controls and can't even leave on her own, but the Doctor is beginning to trust Missy more and more. He gives a brilliant metaphor for her attitude. She understands the universe, but she's never learned to hear the music. She never learned to appreciate the beauty of the universe. But now, that's beginning to change. The episode ends with Missy crying, not even sure why. She jokes that it must be some plan to trick the Doctor, because that's all she's ever really known. Most of her life has been spent being evil, tricking others. She's never really known a life any different. But now, she does, and it's overwhelming. The Doctor entertains the possibility of them finally being friends again, and she seems genuinely enthusiastic about the idea. The Doctor's attitude here purely comes down to hope. Hope that she can change. Hope that she has changed. The idea scares him too, but he really wants to believe it. And thus, we head into the finale.
Who I am. It's where I stand, where I stand. It's where I fall.
I've been looking forward to this. The Series 10 finale. World Enough in Time, and the Doctor Falls. This is what the last 3 series have been building up to. These 2 episodes are easily my favourites of the entire show. The Capaldi era draws to a close with this finale, and it is basically perfect. I'm not sure I can put into words how much I adore these episodes. God, I'm gonna try. Let's begin. World Enough in Time begins with the Doctor dropping out of the TARDIS in a snowy plain as he begins to regenerate, crying out in pain. He clearly doesn't want to go. In all honesty, I find this cold open to be the weakest part of the episode, but it's not a big deal. After the opening titles, we're treated to a stunning visual of the ship we'll be spending the next 100 minutes in. The camera begins on floor 1056 and 507, the two main floors we'll be seeing, as well as floor 502. The camera pans out as we see exactly where this ship is in the universe. Right next to a black hole. We travel to a small observation deck at the very top of the ship, as the TARDIS materializes. In a surprise reveal, though, the Doctor doesn't step out of the doors. Missy does, with Bill and Nardole reluctantly trailing behind her. Missy begins making self-aware remarks, calling herself Doctor Who, and calling Bill and Nardole
exposition and comic relief.
Meanwhile, the Doctor is sitting back in the TARDIS, watching the adventure as it unfolds. A crew member enters the room, clearly panicked as he notices the lifts on the ship are coming to them. Someone, or something, has detected a human on the ship and is coming up to take Bill away. The Doctor steps out of the TARDIS, realizing things are getting too serious, with the crew member pointing a gun directly at Bill, ready to kill her to stop whatever is coming up in the lift, which is now moving a lot slower for some reason. The Doctor gives his usual speech he gives everyone, how he'll save everyone on the ship, how the crew member will learn to trust the Doctor with his life. The Doctor is so used to making speeches like this, assuming it'll work. But this time, as Bill looks down to see the massive hole blown directly through her body, we get a flashback, the build-up to the adventure we've seen so far. The Doctor has seen Missy change. He knows what she's capable of, and he's willing to finally give her a proper chance. He wants to give her an adventure to go on, with Bill and Nardole as companions. Missy is the only person the Doctor has met who is at all like him. She's eccentric, intelligent, and he knows she's capable of doing good. The Doctor and the Master have always been two sides of the same coin. The Master always being jealous of the Doctor and trying to get his attention. And this is the closest the two have ever got to being alike. To being friends. This might be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and the Doctor doesn't want to let it slip through his fingers. Later on, the Doctor and Bill are talking, and the Doctor is still trying to get Bill on his side, explaining how much the Master means to him, how they've known each other basically their whole lives. Everything about this scene screams emotion and compassion from the Doctor, even down to the pronouns he uses to refer to Missy. When talking about the Master of old, the Doctor uses he-him pronouns. But when talking about Missy, the Master he knows now, he calls her she. It might seem like an insignificant detail, but it shows how the Doctor truly sees Missy as a different person to the Master he used to know.
But he was too busy burning them. I don't think she ever saw anything.
Bill asks for one promise. Just one. She wants to know the Doctor won't let her get killed. As we cut between shots of Bill's dead body, still standing in front of them all. All the while, we hear the Doctor and Bill joking about the idea of her dying, as if it's such a far-fetched concept. Because it was to them at the time of the conversation. It's easy to joke about it then, sitting comfortably on a roof, eating food. But it's completely different when it actually happens. Seeing the Doctor joke about the fragility of human bodies as we cut between Bill's body dropping on the floor adds so much pain to this moment. This all happened because of the Doctor's overconfidence. He put his faith in Missy and took a back seat while they went into a perilous situation. And Bill put his faith in him, that he knew what he was doing, and he would try and keep her alive. And now, they're both paying the price. 3 figures come out of the lifts, dressed in what look like hospital gowns, IV machines attached to them, and masks covering their entire faces. They can't even speak, they communicate by pressing buttons on a device. But they still look human. They take Bill away, and the Doctor begins to explain the gravity of the situation. Bill wakes up in an operating theatre, and hears a distant voice. An almost robotic voice, repeating one word over and over. As she tries to find the source of the noise, she finds a room full of these same masked, gowned figures from earlier. She seems to be in some sort of hospital. She finds where the voice is coming from, another room full of masked people. This person is clearly in a lot of pain, but can't even make any noise. They can only press a button that says the word pain in a monotone voice while they sit in silent agony. A nurse comes in and deals with the problem by twisting a dial on the IV machine, making the voice stop. It's unclear what exactly she did at first. Perhaps injected a painkiller? But as they leave, we see the patient still pressing a button on the machine. Bill goes to take a closer look, and we see the dial is marked volume. But surely not, right? Surely she didn't just...
Pain.
Oh, yes, she did. These people are constantly screaming in pain, unable to make a sound, and any attempt they make to voice their discomfort gets muted. This is horrifying. It's brilliantly dark. We then see another patient doing the exact same thing, only this one is saying over and over. I love when Doctor Who gets dark like this. There's a lot of potential for body horror with the Cybermen, but it doesn't really get explored due to Doctor Who being a family show. But this episode manages to create a haunting atmosphere with incomplete Cybermen. The Cybermen are finally being used for body horror, and we don't even realize until the end. The Doctor once again lets his overconfidence get to his head. He takes time to explain the situation of the ship, how the gravity of the black hole is affecting the time differential due to how big the ship is. The few minutes they've spent at the top of the ship have been years for those at the bottom. This is both a smooth way of explaining the concept of black hole gravity to the audience, while showing the Doctor's continued arrogance and self-assuredness, something that will come back to bite him later on. He's busy lecturing about the physics of a black hole, not even considering the fact that Bill has been stuck down there for God knows how long. The Lie of the Land had already shown Bill to be a very strong-willed person, and World Enough in Time just adds to that strength. She keeps waiting for the Doctor. He promised he'd come back for her, and she continues putting faith in him. She puts up with the horrible living conditions of the hospital, confined to one place for years, still trying her best to find positivity in this dark, depressing environment, all with the promise that someday, the Doctor will return. There's a really creepy scene where Bill notices a door is slightly open and opens it properly for a good look outside, only for all the patients in the room to look at her, almost like they're already being reprogrammed to follow the same instructions. Bill's one constant in this reality is Mr. Razor. Bill and the audience grow to love this character. He might be part of the whole process of experimenting on and torturing people, but he's endearing, he's funny, he's a glimmer of hope in this demoralizing prison. He takes Bill outside, and we see how dystopian and derelict everything is. The buildings are old and crumbling. The air is polluted with gases. Everyone's living conditions are very poor. These people simply aren't made to survive in these conditions, and so they resort to desperate means. The experimentations, the torture of all the patients, it's horrific, but it's the best they believe they can do in their current situation. They want to survive by any means necessary, even if that means sacrificing their humanity. Finally, the Doctor, Nordal, and Missy begin to head down to the bottom of the ship, and Mr. Razor takes Bill to the operating theatre, with the promise of finding the lift they'll come down in. She finds some patients, now with a lot more components on their body, while looking very disjointed and cobbled together. It's a really creepy visual, almost making them seem like zombies. Because, in a way, they are. These people are dead, replaced by these prototype machines. It turns out Razor lured Bill in here as a trap, to take her to be converted. She's grown to trust and love him over the last 10 years. and so have we. But he betrays her, hours before she was due to be rescued. This doctor is a completely unfeeling sociopath, treating life like it's something to be experimented on. He sees all these people as test subjects to refine his craft and create the ultimate upgrade. And he finally has it. Bill will be the first proper Cyberman.
This won't stop you feeling pain, but it will stop you caring about it.
This is easily one of the darkest, most twisted lines in Doctor Who. The trio land at the bottom of the ship, and you're just left hoping they've got there in time to save Bill. The Doctor and Nardole enter the conversion theatre, and a door slowly swings open, a pair of silver boots standing underneath the darkness. The camera moves up as we see a full suit, a Mondasian Cyberman. The Cyberman approaches the Doctor, recognizing him. At this point, you know what's gonna happen, and you're just left dreading the moment. But
I am Bill Potts.
the Doctor was too busy showing off upstairs. He was too late. Bill has been upgraded. The first soldier of Operation Exodus. Meanwhile, Mr. Razor goes to greet Missy, bizarrely infatuated with her, insisting she's been here before. But she has no memory of that. Eventually, he rips off his disguise. My god, what a reveal! John Sim, the last master to appear in the show before Missy, is back. This is where the culmination of Missy's arc really begins. The return of her previous self is a showcase of just how much she's changed. Missy's development has been quite gradual, so it's hard to process how different she is to the Saxon Master. Him showing up brings about the dangerous possibility of all her development being undone, as she'll be unsure who to side with. The Master or the Doctor. In the moment, she joins the Master, taunting the Doctor about Bill being the genesis of the Cybermen. The look of pure fear on the Doctor's face when he sees the Master is perfect. And then, Bill drops the final line.
I waited for you.
As she sheds a single tear. And with that, the episode ends. My god, what an episode. It's such a brilliant opening to the finale. It's filled with tension, darkness, sadness. This feels like Dark Water, but a million times better. The designs of the Cybermen as they cycle through prototypes are genuinely creepy. The dystopian landscape of the hospital and the area surrounding it are perfectly realized. This episode hardly gives you a moment to breathe, bombarding you with surprises and horror. This whole thing is basically set up for the character piece of The Doctor Falls, but it's a testament to this episode that it holds up magnificently on its own. My only problem with this episode isn't even the episode itself, but the marketing surrounding it. Back when Series 10 was airing, the return of the Master and the Mondasian Cybermen was marketed to no end, massively diminishing the cliffhanger. But with that being said, it's once again a testament to World Enough in Time that the ending still works as well as it does, even if you already knew about these returning villains. I can only imagine what this ending must be like to someone who wasn't spoiled by the marketing. World Enough in Time is basically perfect. Doctor Who at its absolute best. And now, for the conclusion. The Doctor Falls, like Hellbent, opens in a seemingly completely different location. The countryside. Everything seems ordinary at first. Then we see the patients from the hospital, propped up like scarecrows. And we see the number 507, the same floor the Master spoke about in the previous episode. Soon after, a spaceship crashes through the ground, and a Cyberman emerges, carrying a lifeless Doctor. Back in the lower city, the Master and Missy are taunting the Doctor, debating how they're gonna kill him, and relishing in Bill's fate, how the Doctor could have prevented it if he didn't spend so long lecturing upstairs. Missy's description of what happened to Bill is incredibly vivid and horrifying. Watching this episode now, I think of the scene in The Giggle when the toymaker says Bill was
killed by the Cybermen,
when in actuality, just being killed by them would be a mercy compared to what actually happened to her. This finale doesn't shy away from the core concept of the Cybermen, making sure you remember that they aren't just robots, they're people. People who lived in unsustainable conditions, reaching a point where their goal was to survive no matter what, even if they weren't themselves anymore. The Cybermen aren't evil geniuses. They're not a warrior race like the Sontarans, and they're not hell-bent on universal domination like the Daleks or the Master. They were just very scared people who wanted to survive. They consider the upgrade to be the only solution. It's terrifying because it's realistic. They're a chilling look into what we could become. The Cybermen tend to be very underutilized, and their core concept tends to get muddled. But the Capaldi era, and this finale in particular, is a massive return to form for them, properly diving into and taking advantage of the uniqueness of them as a villain. The tables begin to turn, as the Doctor reveals he changed the Cyberman algorithm, so they register Time Lords as humans. A very subtle touch I love here is the occasional shots of Missy. She's not saying a lot, yet her facial expressions represent so much. She chose to side with the Master, but now she's wondering if that was the right move, as the Doctor shows how there's always hope, how he's always one step ahead, how he's the only one who can stop the Cybermen. Missy knocks the Master out and says,
I was secretly on your side all along, you silly sausage.
Saying it in a half-jokey manner, but the Doctor wants to know if she meant it, and presses her for an answer. Everything stands still as he searches for the answer, whether Missy pretended to be on the Master's side all along. If so, it's another massive showcase of how much she's changed, willing to betray herself for the Doctor. But Missy doesn't even properly know. She's got many conflicting emotions right now, as a literal manifestation of her past shows up, just as she's becoming happy with where she's headed. There's a lot of potential relatability to be found with Missy here. If you're someone who had bad habits in the past, but are on your way to healing, it's incredibly easy for toxic people to pull you back into that dark place. And the Master represents that. All of these emotions are understandably confusing for Missy, but a major part of her still wants to side with the Doctor. You can see how she hesitates when asked if she meant what she said, before dodging the question with a joke. Just as they're about to leave, a Cyberman attacks the Doctor, and Missy goes to help him. She picks up the Master's laser screwdriver, but hesitates, not wanting to accidentally shoot the Doctor. Any previous Master would have just left the Doctor to die, or at best, fired indiscriminately at the two of them, not caring whether he hits the Doctor or not. But then, Bill saves him. She's not part of the Cyberman hive mind. She's rebelling against the programming, and despite everything the Doctor has put her through, saves him. It's here we catch up to what happened in the cold open. We fast forward to 2 weeks later, as we see Bill sleeping in a barn, looking like a human again. But people are scared of going near her. Something isn't right. Even Alit, who claims not to be scared of her, backs away when she approaches. Alit gives Bill a mirror. She looks in it, and a Cyberman stares back at her. I'm unsure if this was intentional or not, but this could be seen as a queer allegory. The idea of appearing as someone else, someone you're not. I could see this being a really powerful allegory for being trans. Looking in the mirror and seeing someone completely different to who you know you are inside. The cyber foundries represent society turning you into someone you're not to fit their standards. The idea of the Cybermen being used as a queer allegory is genius, intentional or not. And personally, I find this interpretation adds so much to the nuance of Bill's character in this episode. You could also draw some parallels to Deep Breath. Madame Vastra gives a speech to Clara about how she wears a veil to be accepted. which could also be viewed with queer connotations, since Vastra, like Bill, is lesbian. The idea of the 12th Doctor's first and final adventures both containing queer allegories is incredibly poetic, especially since a strong recurring theme of this era as a whole is self-acceptance. Our perception of Bill alternates a lot between her human self and her Cyberman exterior, as she battles for freedom over herself. Despite everything, the Doctor and Nardole still see her as Bill, even though sometimes she turns back into a Cyberman again, usually when Bill gets really emotional, ironically enough. As much as they care about her, even they struggle to completely look past the reality that she's been all but killed, and forced into a Cyberman. When the Master shows up, Bill only ever appears as a Cyberman, showing his lack of empathy. Continuing on from the trans aspects I mentioned earlier, the Master also makes some jokes with very transphobic connotations.
So, didn't you used to be a woman? I'm going to be a woman. Any tips? Or maybe old bras?
As he leaves, we see Bill as who she really is again. And she's upset. She's still capable of crying. The episode doesn't forget that Bill formed a really close connection with Mr. Razor over 10 years, him being the only friend she had. Her only comfort as she waited for the Doctor. For him to be lying through his teeth the whole time, only using her to be the first Cyberman simply to get back at the Doctor? Of course that's gonna hurt. The Doctor has also started the regeneration process, but he puts it off as long as he can. Primarily because he can't afford to regenerate yet. He's got a village to protect, and if he's going down fighting. He also admits that he can't get Bill back to how she was. Bill briefly gives up hope, accepting that this is an adventure they can't survive. But the Doctor, no matter what, never gives up hope. He cites Bill crying despite being a Cyberman as proof that there's always hope. That no matter what, impossible things can happen. And they never know. The best thing is to keep fighting and do the right thing. Then, this scene happens. Okay, this episode as a whole has been brilliant so far, but this is where it reaches otherworldly levels. The Master and Missy decide to leave, abandoning the villagers and the Doctor to save themselves. The Doctor can't actually stop the Cybermen. The best he can do is fight them and hold them off while the villagers move a few levels up to another solar farm, giving them more time before the Cybermen find them again. But no matter what, the Doctor isn't getting out of this one, and he knows it. They begin walking away, and the Doctor can see all that effort he made to change Missy fading away in the blink of an eye. But there's still a spark there. You can see when the Doctor yells, "No!" Missy hesitates for just a second. As he runs up to them, the Master has a smug look on his face, while Missy's is full of contemplation, fear of what's about to happen. No matter what, she's built up a close connection with the Doctor throughout this series, and he genuinely has faith in her. She really is in two minds about all of this, but now she can't run any longer. This is the moment where she decides who she is, who she will stand with. The Doctor gives one last speech to his oldest friend. If this is going to be their last conversation, he's not going to hold back. The Doctor doesn't do what he does for victory. He doesn't do what he does out of malice, or hatred, or fear, or egotism. The Doctor does what he does out of kindness. Even just one life being prolonged is a victory to him, and he will risk his own, fighting impossible odds to make that a reality. Without hope, without witness, without reward. This is who the Doctor is. The Doctor knows this will be his last stand. All he can do is sacrifice his life to help a group of innocent people live a little while longer, because it's the right thing to do. Running away would be cruel and cowardly, and the Doctor couldn't bring himself to do that. The Doctor has spent a long time meditating on who he is, and now he's found it. He knows who he is, and he knows what he would die for. Like he said in The Witch's Familiar, he wouldn't die of anything else than compassion. New Who has a bit of a habit of portraying the Doctor as this godlike, perfect being. But this is the Doctor boiled down to his most basic, core elements, finally reaching self-acceptance as he reaches the end.
Who I am is where I stand. It's where I fall.
I could not ask for a better summary of the Doctor. He makes one last plea to the Master, begging for him to do the right thing, to put their differences aside and stand together. Missy looks over, longing to hear the Master agree. She wants to stand with the Doctor, but can't bring herself to without her past self. It's easy enough for her to grow and change on her own, but it's a lot harder when that legacy she's leaving behind is staring her in the face. The Master refuses and walks away. With one last chance, he turns to Missy. He knows she's different, and her hesitation to walk away with the Master shows that the spark is still there. He begs her to stand with him. They both agree that it's all they ever really wanted. But Missy turns him down. Her line of
just no
represents the old version of her, whereas her follow-up line of
thanks for trying
represents the new version of herself, the one who changed. Deep down, she is genuinely grateful for all the Doctor did for her, and would have loved to stand with him. Unfortunately, her past got in the way. She walks away, choosing to side with her past self, and God, it kills me. As they head back to the lift, Missy watches an explosion in the distance, thinking about everything the Doctor said, whether she truly made the right decision by abandoning him. By fighting back, the village has made the Cybermen realize they're dealing with a true threat, and they change from wanting to simply upgrade the villagers to planning a full-on assault with hostile intent. But this gives the villagers a chance to evacuate the floor, leaving the Doctor to deal with the much bigger assault that's on its way. The Doctor tells Nardole to lead the evacuation, meaning he'll have to stay with all the villagers. Nardole refuses at first, but the Doctor puts things into perspective. One of them has to look after a group of people, and the other has to stay here and die fighting an army of Cybermen. And the Doctor asks Nardole one question.
Which one of us is stronger?
The Doctor and Nardole both consider staying and dying to be the easier option, and knows Nardole would never choose the easier option. Nardole is a victim of his own vanity. It might seem like a strange reason for him to leave on the surface, but it's just so meaningful. We've seen Nardole's development into a more mature and strong person since his first appearance, and now he's just too self-assured to admit he's lesser than the Doctor. Bill decides to stay and fight with the Doctor. She describes it as returning the favor, kicking the Cybermen's arse because they kicked hers for 10 years. But at the same time, I think returning the favor could also be her talking about the Doctor. The Doctor gave her another life, showed her wonders, supported her through everything. She's got no other life now that she's a Cyberman. The least she can do is fight alongside the Doctor in their final hour. Nardole's final line of
"I never will be able to find the words"
means so much. How do you summarize and end a friendship that meaningful to you? Regardless of his exterior, Nardole cares about the Doctor and Bill, and they mean a lot to him. And all the time in the world wouldn't be enough for him to think of the perfect farewell. The next wave of Cybermen are approaching, and the Doctor and Bill share their final conversation. Just like Nardole, they can't find the right words. Except Bill has one final question for the Doctor.
You know how I'm usually all about women.
Yeah?
Glad you knew that.
This is beautiful. She's just glad the Doctor saw her for who she is. It's so simple, and yet it means so much. Before the final showdown, The last scene with the Master and Missy begins. Missy has made her decision. She discreetly stabs him, harming him enough to cause a regeneration. And she explains why. It's time for her to stand with the Doctor. It's where they've always been headed. Missy started out wanting the Doctor to be like her, but in the end, she became like him. Those decades of influence paid off. She's truly changed and has come round to the Doctor's way of thinking. She finally becomes sure in herself, reaching her own self-acceptance, only to be shot down by her past self. The Master shot himself. The Time Lord, too vain to ever let himself be killed, would rather kill himself than stand with the Doctor. All they can do is laugh as they come to terms with this new reality. The Master goes down in the lift, and Missy falls to the ground, dying after finally deciding to stand with the Doctor after all those years. And the worst part is, the Doctor never knew Missy wanted to stand with him at the end. It's such a powerful, painful end to Missy's arc, and this is where the tears really start flowing for me. We then get a brilliant scene of the Doctor fighting off all the Cybermen, entering his last stand and giving it his all until the end. All the while, the Shepherd's Boy is playing, the same track that plays in Heaven Sent as the Doctor breaks down the wall. This track represents keeping it up, no matter what gets thrown at you. You can always overcome your challenges if you have faith and give it your all. He blows up as many as he can, until one of them shoots him. At this point, he knows it's the end. He's done everything he can. He's stood and fallen exactly the way he wanted to. Helping people. Being a good man. His line of, "Hello, I'm the Doctor," perfectly represents this. No matter what, he was the Doctor. And no army of Cybermen can take that away from him. He drops to the floor, his hand glowing with regeneration energy. But he refuses. Regenerating won't make a difference. And besides, he's satisfied going out this way. Time enough. With one final move, he detonates the entire floor, killing all the Cybermen. As he lays on the ground, staring up at the sky for one last time, he drops one final heartbreaking line.
Pity, no stars. I hope there be stars.
There's one last survivor though. Bill. She trudges towards the Doctor, her armor broken and disheveled. But she stayed alive, with the hope of seeing him again. But just like he was too late for her, she's too late for him. The Doctor is seemingly dead, and this crushes Bill, completely disregarding all of the cyber programming and crying genuine tears, distraught at this reality. But then, Heather, the puddle alien from the pilot, shows up, taking Bill out of her Cyberman prison and giving her new life. There are some people who like to claim Doctor Who actually ended here, that everything after this isn't canon. While I completely disagree with these people, if Doctor Who were to come to an end, I couldn't ask for a better ending than this. Originally, the era was supposed to end here, with the Doctor regenerating, but incoming showrunner Chris Chibnall didn't want to do a Christmas special, which led Moffat to put together an epilogue of sorts. The Doctor Falls ends with the Doctor refusing to regenerate. He's been through too much and finally accepted who he is just at the end. He can't bring himself to start that cycle all over again, just as he finally reached enlightenment. The TARDIS takes him to the North Pole, when suddenly a figure appears from behind the fog. The First Doctor, played by David Bradley, just about to regenerate for the first time, and also refusing to accept his fate. I don't know if I can properly sum up The Doctor Falls. It's just a masterpiece in every sense of the word. It culminates the arcs of the Doctor, Bill, and Missy in beautiful, satisfying, and heartbreaking ways. It is just the perfect ending to the character-focused brilliance of the Capaldi era. It never fails to make me feel so many emotions, and I am perfectly happy calling it my favourite episode of all time. I could not ask for a better swan song to this era. Doctor Who at its absolute best. Although the 12th Doctor era technically comes to an end with the Doctor falls, there's one last episode. An epilogue of sorts, in Twice Upon a Time. I say of sorts because this isn't really a proper adventure. The Doctor Falls is still the final adventure of the 12th Doctor era. This episode doesn't detract from that in any way. The 12th Doctor finds the First Doctor, about to regenerate for the first time, but refusing to do so. This whole episode is about acceptance and the importance of doing good. You could argue the Doctor refusing to regenerate undermines the themes of self-acceptance presented in the finale. In fact, some people do. But I'd argue it works better than people give it credit for. The World War I captain that gets embroiled in the adventure puts it best.
One doesn't want to die, but one gets in a certain frame of mind, one pulls oneself together and gets on with the matter in hand. And you see, I'm not ready anymore.
That's a parallel to the Doctor. He accepted his fate and got on with the job in hand, destroying the Cybermen. But now, his body is just refusing to die. And the TARDIS is doing what it can to convince him to regenerate. But he doesn't want to. He isn't ready for it, especially not just after reaching a state of acceptance. The whole point of this bonus episode is that it's just as much of a surprise to the Doctor as it was to the production team. We also finally get some expansion on why the Doctor left Gallifrey. It was a recurring topic in Series 9, but that was mainly to do with the hybrid. Here, we get more information from the Doctor who ran away. There were several reasons for him running away, one of which being curiosity. Something that fascinates the Doctor is how good often prevails over evil throughout the universe, despite good as a concept being inherently less practical and more susceptible to being undone by evil. The Doctor began traveling the universe to find out why good always prevails, not realizing it's him. He's the reason. He's the Doctor, the one who spreads good and heroism across the universe. In one last act of good, the Doctor adjusts the time frame of the Captain's death, moving everything a few hours ahead, to the start of the Christmas armistice. The one time where all the soldiers in World War I stopped fighting and began to sing, showing how no matter how certain your death looks, despite the universe failing to be a fairy tale, the Doctor will be there, even for himself. The First Doctor reaches acceptance, heading off to regenerate for the first time and start an undying legacy. The 12th Doctor has also reached a point of acceptance, and finally gets his memories of Clara back. He ended up having to forget Clara because of his refusal to accept change, but he's grown and matured since then, and has earned those memories back. The Doctor compares his life to the now empty battlefield they stand on. Living as long as he has, he loses everyone, until he ends up alone. He embraces his friends one last time, before they disappear in his arms. His time with them, once again, cut short. But he doesn't complain, he doesn't lash out, he accepts that everything has its time. He can cherish the memories he has, but it's important to move on. And he does. He gives one last speech, advising the next Doctor on how to act, passing on everything he learned throughout this incarnation. All the while, the Shepherd's Boy plays one last time. The first time it played, it represented the Doctor overcoming grief. The second time, it represented the Doctor finding his calling and fighting to the end. And here, it represents the end, reaching acceptance as he finally feels complete, ready to move on. With one final line,
Doctor, I let you go.
The Doctor regenerates, the era coming to a close, as a new, very different era takes its place.
I'm the Doctor. I've lived for over 2,000 years.
People always get it wrong with Time Lords. We take forever to die.
As of this moment, I'm answerable to no one.
Why did I choose this face?
Right now, you could run faster and you could fight harder.
Darkest day, the blackest hour.
Chin up, shoulders back. Let's see what we're made of. I'm coming to find you, and I will never, ever stop.
This is a scale model of war. Every war ever fought right there in front of you.
Don't make assumptions about how far I will go to protect them, because I've already come a very long way.
I don't need an army. I never have, because I've got them.
Always them.
Because it's always the same. When you fire that first shot, no matter how right you feel, you have no idea who's going to die. Sometimes, if I try very hard, I'm not some old Time Lord who ran away. I'm the Doctor.
They all lost, and burned, and ran. That's who I am. I serve at the pleasure of the human race, and right now that's you. Give me an order. This is my world too. I walk your earth. I breathe your air.
I know where I got this face, and I know what it's for.
It's okay. I went too far. Broke all my own rules. I'm changing history to save Clara.
I'm the Doctor, and I save people.
Sometimes the only choices you have are bad ones, but you still have to choose.
He is the Doctor. He has walked this universe for centuries untold. He has seen stars fall to dust.
When you love the Doctor, it's like loving the stars themselves. You don't expect a sunset to admire you back.
That's the trouble with hope. It's hard to resist. Stand with me. It's all I've ever wanted.
Every star in the universe, well, we're going to see them all. I do what I do because it's right. Never be cruel, never be cowardly.
This is right.
The universe generally fails to be a fairy tale. That's where we come in. The man that stops the monsters. And above all, it's kind.
I'm 2,000 years old, and I have never had the time for the luxury of outrage. Everything ends, and it's always sad. But everything begins again, too, and that's always happy. Human progress isn't measured by industry. It's measured by the value you place on a life. Without hope, without witness, without reward. Thank you both. Everything that you were to me.
It's time to stand with the Doctor.
Time to leave the battlefield.
No one else will ever have to live like this.
I just had to hang on in there for a bit.
You must think that's a hell of a long time.
Just kind. Doctor. I let you go.
I absolutely adore the Peter Capaldi era. Big surprise. This era of Doctor Who stands out and speaks to me in a way none of the others do. The bigger focus on character-driven narratives serves as a really compelling and fresh look into the show. And the Doctor as a character, and is a perfect step forward in maturity and cohesion from the whimsical, fairy tale-esque Matt Smith era. The stories we're presented with are brilliant too, containing some of the absolute best Doctor Who out there. I adore the overarching themes of self-acceptance, boiling the Doctor down to his most core principles while dissecting him in a way the show hadn't quite managed before. This era is a triumph that went unfairly overlooked for years. Thankfully, things have changed in recent times, as the Capaldi era has achieved a massive level of respect and admiration within the Doctor Who community. But I still feel like the general consensus of this era still has a way to go. And I felt that making this video is the best I can do to help people truly realize how well this era works. So if you're a Doctor Who fan who never thought much of the Capaldi era, or dismissed it with the bad writing assertion, I really hope this video has encouraged you to give it another go with all this new context in mind. Who knows? You may end up finding your new favourite era. Regardless, thank you very much if you sat through this entire video. And remember, don't be lasagna.